Chapter 489. Go to watch net. The disciple of the Gazao sect, who had come to inform them, whispered a few words in Wang Jinyuan's ear. Wang Jinyuan said angrily, "What are you doing? Didn't you get through to them in advance?" The disciple muttered in a low voice with an aggrieved expression, "We did get through to them, but it seems that a few new policemen have come this time. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. When Wang Jinyuan heard this, he suddenly felt a headache coming on. He knew that a new official had to be careful. This kind of new policemen liked to cause trouble the most, and they could often stir up trouble. There were so many cultivators here, so they were not afraid of these policemen. However, the cultivation world had never liked to deal with this kind of judicial department. The fact that the police had come to the Taoist assembly hosted by the Gazao sect really made Wang Jinyuan lose face. When the crowd heard the conversation between Wang Jinyuan and his disciple, they all burst into an uproar. They said at once, "Master Wang, what are you doing? Why are the police here?" Wang Jinyuan cupped his hands with a wry smile and said, "Fellow Taoists, don't be impatient. This must be an accident. Just explain it clearly." Someone said in a strange tone, "Explain? How? If you want to explain, you can do it yourself. We won't accompany you." "That's right. If the police can come now, who else can come later?" Seeing that the crowd was making a ruckus, Wang Jinyuan stretched out his hands and said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet, be quiet. I already have a plan to deal with it." When the crowd heard this, they temporarily quieted down and looked at Wang Jinyuan with unfriendly eyes. As long as they were dissatisfied with what he said, they would immediately curse him. Wang Jinyuan said loudly, "I have already prepared a good and quiet place in the mysterious temple. I originally wanted to let all of you go and have a look tomorrow, but I didn't expect such a thing to happen today. Why don't we all go together? What do you think?" The cultivators on the boat looked at each other. They were very unhappy, but there was nothing they could do. They hesitated for a moment, and sure enough, they heard the sound of an alarm coming from outside. They suddenly burst into an uproar and could only nod helplessly. Wang Jinyuan smiled and cupped his hands at the crowd. "Everyone, let's go to the mysterious view. I will send a disciple there to lead the way." Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school took the lead and walked out of the boat. Then, the other disciples of the Jingyi school also walked out in a line. The cultivators on the yacht shouted and followed them one after another. Su Chan widened her eyes and said, "No way. How did the Taoist assembly end up like this?" Ruan Hongling also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, "Why is it like an underground meeting? What is going on?" Li Yundong smiled and said to the two of them, "Well, don't say any more. Since everyone is going, let's go." He turned his head and whispered to Zhou Qin, "Can you move?" Zhou Qin smiled gently and nodded. Not bad. After that, she struggled to stand up. As soon as she moved, she immediately felt a sharp pain in her body. She couldn't help but frown. Li Yundong sighed and said, "Don't try to be brave. Forget it. I'll carry you there." As he said this, he put Zhou Qin on his back and said to Ziyuan with a smile, "Ziyuan, where is the mysterious view?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Do you really think I know everything? Do you think I know everything?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Is there anything in the world that you don't know?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "There is no end to learning. There are many things that I don't know. But coincidentally, I happen to know where the mysterious view is." Ruan Hongling, who was standing to one side, interrupted proudly, "My Shiji Ziyuan knows everything about astronomy and geography. She will definitely know such a small thing." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then please lead the way, Jinren Ziyuan." The group of people chatted and laughed as they got out of the yacht. At this time, as soon as they got out of the yacht, they saw a few police cars parked on the side of the road at the dock. Several young policemen in uniforms shouted at the Taoist priests who had rushed out of the yacht, "Hey, stop, all of you." However, these cultivators all had unique skills. They laughed and didn't walk very fast, but with a few steps, they left the policeman far behind. When Li Yundong and the others came out, the policemen turned their heads and saw a young and handsome man leading a group of stunning beauties out of the yacht. They had never seen so many stunning beauties appear in front of them, and they were all stunned. A policeman looked at them for a while, then turned to his superior and asked, "Captain Zhang, what should we do?" The captain, surnamed Zhang, scratched his hair and said angrily, "Damn it, let's go up and arrest them first. We'll take them back and ask them slowly." The policeman immediately stepped forward excitedly and shouted, "Stop." Li Yundong turned his head and smiled. He said to Zi Yuan and the others, "Let's compete and see who can run faster. What do you think?" Except for Zhou Qin, who was lying quietly on Li Yundong's back, all the girls laughed and jumped forward. In a few moments, they had disappeared without a trace. When the policemen saw these beautiful women disappear in a few leaps like chivalrous heroes, they immediately stopped in their tracks and stood there dumbfounded. They were dumbfounded and speechless. Only Li Yundong was still standing there with Zhou Qin on his back. He smiled at them and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Captain Zhang seemed to wake up from a dream and said, "Someone called the police and said that you were holding an illegal assembly." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Who called the police?" Captain Zhang's face became serious and he said with a dignified expression, "I can't tell you this. You should go back with us first. It will be fine after we explain it clearly." Li Yundong was not stupid. Everyone had left, and he was the only one left. Wouldn't he be a scapegoat if he stayed? He laughed and said, "Forget it, I'll go to your place for tea another day. I still have something to do here, so I'll go first." Captain Zhang was anxious and shouted, "Stop, don't go." After that, he shouted at his subordinates, "Why are you standing there? Go and catch him." The policeman seemed to wake up from a dream and quickly rushed forward. Li Yundong didn't want to be entangled with them. He laughed and carried Zhou Qin on his back. With a few leaps, he jumped from one side of the moat to the other and then went far away. This time, the policemen were stunned. They stood by the river and their eyes almost fell out. Damn, is he shooting a movie? Is it that exaggerated? At this time, Chris, John, Alba, and the others, who had been standing in the distance, were also staring at Li Yundong's figure with their mouths agape. The three foreigners looked at each other, and Alba said, "Am I seeing things? He just jumped from one side of the moat to the other?" John stammered, "It seems so. God, he is carrying an adult on his back. Although it is a woman, but it is also an adult woman. How did he jump over?" Chris's eyes widened. Once again, she saw a kind of inhuman power in this young man, which confirmed what her grandmother had once said to her: there were some mysterious people in this world, and they had mysterious and powerful powers. Alba's face turned pale. If he goes to the Olympic Games, I guess he can win all the gold medals in track and field events, right? Chris didn't know why, but she sighed softly and said, "My grandmother is right. China is really a place with hidden talents. I don't know how many strange people are hiding among the people." Alba stared at her and said, "Why don't they come out to win glory for our country and serve our country? Don't Chinese people pay the most attention to contributing to their country?" Chris shook her head and said, "They are very special. We can't measure them with ordinary people's thinking." Alba thought for a moment and nodded. "That's true. That Li Yundong is a male chauvinist bastard." John said with a sad face, "Ladies, the question now is, what should we do next?" Chris frowned and said, "Let's follow them and see what's going on." John smiled bitterly and said, "But how? Who are you going to follow?" At this time, the three foreigners looked at each other and found that almost all the people on the yacht had run away. How could they still be seen on the street? On the opposite side of the road from Chris, Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako were looking at this scene in surprise. Tachibana Wakako said innocently, "Master Xinyan, why are they running? Is it because they know that we are coming? Xinyan didn't say anything. He just looked at the policemen who were in a daze with a strange look. However, Shinsu sneered and said, "These useless Chinese cultivators were scared away by a few unarmed policemen." Tachibana Wakako said with a disappointed face, "Ah. Then won't we be able to watch the fun?" As she said this, she reached out to pull Xinyan's sleeve and begged, "Master Xinyan, what should we do?" Xinyan thought for a moment, then waved his hand. After a while, a sparrow fell from his palm. He muttered a few incantations, then shook his arm, and the sparrow flew into the air with a whoosh. Xinyan turned to Tachibana Wakako and said with a smile, "Don't worry, Tachibana Wakako. It won't be long before we find them. These Chinese cultivators are too ridiculous. They were actually driven away by a few policemen to change places for a Taoist assembly. Hee, it's really incredible and ridiculous." Just as the sparrow sent out by Xinyan was flying in the air, Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others had already gathered together again. The group soon arrived in front of the mysterious temple on Guanxian Street in Dongwu City. Li Yundong saw that Guanxian Street was a bustling commercial pedestrian street, but there was an antique Taoist temple in the depths of the pedestrian street. The Taoist temple was full of incense, and there were many tourists. He asked curiously, "Is this the place?" Zi Yuan nodded and said, "Yes, this is the mysterious temple. Because this street is in front of the mysterious temple, it is also called Guanxian Street." As soon as she finished speaking, a person suddenly came over from the side of the road and asked them, "Excuse me, are you Jinren Li Yundong and Jinren Zi Yuan?" Li Yundong turned his head and saw a young man dressed no different from an ordinary person talking to him. He asked curiously, "Are you from the Gazao sect?" The young man smiled slightly and said, "Jinren Li, please forgive me for not showing Taoist etiquette in the busy market, so as not to attract people's attention. Our sect master ordered me to meet you here. Please come with me." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, lead the way." The group of people slowly followed behind the young man. Li Yundong looked around carefully and saw that although there were fashionable and famous shops everywhere on the pedestrian street, none of the shops were tall. The tallest one was no more than 5 floors, and the overall building still maintained a classical charm. In particular, the young man took them through a few detours from the mysterious temple and came to a narrow alley paved with bluestones. There were classical garden buildings with white walls and black tiles everywhere, making people feel as if they had stepped into a quiet and elegant paradise from the noisy world of mortals. Li Yundong couldn't help but ask curiously, "There's actually such a place in the busy city of Dongwu, where every inch of land is worth gold. Are they all from the Gazao sect, or are they borrowed?" The young man leading the way smiled slightly and said proudly, "Our sect master has several gardens in Dongwu City. This is just one of them." Li Yundong turned to Zi Yuan and whispered, "Is the Gazao sect so rich?" Zi Yuan also whispered, "External alchemy is the richest of all the cultivation sects in the world, because they make a living by selling medicine. Haven't you heard of the saying, in addition to robbing, they also sell medicine? The most profitable business in the world is robbery and selling medicine." Li Yundong secretly sighed and said, "That's true, and selling medicine is a legal robbery." The group of people followed the young man for a few more steps. The young man suddenly stopped in front of a round arched wooden door and said with a smile, "We're here. Jinren Li, Jinren Zi Yuan, please come in." As he spoke, he walked to the door, pushed it open, and respectfully invited Li Yundong and the others in. Li Yundong carried Zhou Qin on his back and led Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others in. Li Yundong looked around and saw that he was in an elegant garden with flowers in full bloom. He was surrounded by grass, green trees, rockery, and strange rocks. In front of him was a gravel path paved with cobblestones, and in the distance was a long corridor with red pillars and white walls. It was full of antique poetic and picturesque scenery. What was even rarer was that there was a faint melodious sound of pingtan singing from the depths of the garden. A delicate female voice was softly singing a song in the dialect of Dongwu. For a moment, Li Yundong and the others were stunned. Seeing such a beautiful scene, Li Yundong couldn't help sighing. It's said that the gardens of Jiangnan are the best in the world, and the gardens of Dongwu are the best in Jiangnan. They really deserve their reputation. Master Wan really knows how to live a good life. Su Chan couldn't help but say with a leisurely and yearning expression, Yundong, when can we live in such a garden? Li Yundong smiled and pinched the tip of the girl's nose. Okay, but even if we have a garden, who will sing songs for me? Su Chan pointed to herself with a smile and said, Me, I can sing. Li Yundong laughed and said, You can sing songs? That's rare. Sing one for me when we go back. Li Yundong and Su Chan always flirted with each other regardless of the occasion. Zi Yuan looked helplessly at the young man who was leading the way. She smiled apologetically and said, We can go in by ourselves. There's nothing for you to do here. The young man nodded with a smile and turned to leave. Ruan Hongling looked at his figure with a strange look in her eyes. When Li Yundong saw this, he couldn't help laughing and said, What's wrong? Are you dumbfounded when you see a handsome guy? Ruan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. What? I just think this guy is a little strange. Li Yundong smiled and said, What's so strange about it? Ruan Hongling said curiously, It's the first time I've seen a man suddenly see so many beautiful women, and he can look normal without feeling surprised or dazed at all. Li Yundong laughed and said, You're beating around the bush to praise yourself, aren't you? Ruan Hongling snorted and said, Bah, you can't spit out ivory from a dog's mouth. Don't be so long-winded. Let's go. Li Yundong smiled and led the way. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others admired the unique arrangement of flowers and plants in the garden and couldn't help but sigh. Only Ruan Hongling was thinking about what had just happened. The more she thought about it, the more strange she felt. For a moment, she unconsciously fell behind the group. When she reached the corner of a long corridor, Ruan Hongling suddenly felt as if someone was watching her. She turned her head and saw a figure quickly flash into the corner. Although it was fast, Ruan Hongling still recognized the person. She was shocked and wondered, why does this figure look so much like Chao Yi, Shibwa of the Fox Zen School? C. Chapter 490. Go to watch net. Ruan Hongling only glanced at him for a moment. When she looked again, this person had already disappeared without a trace. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. After walking for a while, Li Yundong found that someone was missing. He looked back and saw that Ruan Hongling was looking behind him. He asked curiously, Ruan Hongling, what are you looking at? Ruan Hongling turned her head and said with a bewildered expression, I think I saw someone just now. Li Yundong smiled and said, How refreshing. There are so many people here. Don't you see? The little foxes next to him laughed. Ruan Hongling said anxiously, No, I think I saw Chao Yi of the Fox Zen School. What? This time, the little foxes couldn't laugh anymore. Their eyes widened. Shibwa Chao Yi? Where is she? Li Yundong frowned and asked in a deep voice, Are you sure? Ruan Hongling hesitated for a moment. Just now, the figure passed by very quickly, so I might not have seen it clearly. But I feel that she looks like Zhuang Yiting. Anyway, their figures are very similar. Zi Yuan knew that this matter was not a trivial matter. Yan Fong was hiding in the dark and spying on the Fox Zen School. This was already a thorn in Li Yundong's heart, making him unable to sleep or eat in peace. Zi Yuan asked seriously, Hongling, this matter can't be vague. Did you see it or not? Ruan Hongling thought about it seriously and said, In fact, I didn't see it clearly, but when I saw this person, she seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. Then when I looked at her back, Chao Yi's name came to my mind subconsciously. Hearing this, everyone felt a chill run down their spines, as if Yan Fong was watching them from some dark corner of this place. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve with a frightened face and said, Yundong, did Yan Fong sneak into the Taoist assembly? Zhou Qin, who was lying on his back, said softly, "Master, I always feel that this Taoist assembly is a trap." When the little foxes heard this, they were so frightened that they looked around, as if they could not wait to escape from this place in the next second. Zi Yuan pondered for a while and frowned slightly. Wang Jinyuan wouldn't be so crazy as to use the Taoist assembly as bait, would he? Most of the people who came to the Taoist assembly were masters of the younger generation. Even if they were all killed here, the foundation of the big sects would not be shaken. Because the lifespan of a cultivator was almost infinite, a disciple could be cultivated again after his death. However, if Wang Jinyuan did this, it would attract the crazy revenge of those hidden senior masters, and the Gazao sect would be destroyed. Although Wang Jinyuan is ambitious, he is not stupid. Li Yundong also nodded and said, "You're right. Zhou Qin, I know what you're thinking. If Wang Jinyuan wanted to use the Taoist assembly to balance things out, suppress the various sects, and let them fight each other, then his Gazao sect would benefit from it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have incited the cultivators of the various sects and sects again and again. Moreover, I believe that all the cultivators in the world are not fools. They will keep their guard up." Zi Yuan smiled in agreement and said, "That's right. I don't believe that Wang Jinyuan would have the guts to set up a trap." Li Yundong patted the little girl's head and said with a smile, "I'm here. Don't worry. Even if it's a trap, they can't do anything to me." Su Chan looked at the boy in front of her with infatuation. When she first met him, he was just a little boy who didn't know anything about cultivation. But now, he had grown into an indomitable master. As long as he was in front of her, even if the sky fell down, she didn't need to be afraid. The little girl nodded heavily and looked at Li Yundong with great admiration and dependence. She said with a smile, "Yes, my Yundong is now a great master. Even if there are tricks, you won't be afraid, right?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "This is what it means to be strong enough to defeat 10 people. In the face of true strength, all schemes and tricks were useless. It's fine if Yan Fong doesn't come, but if she does, I'll make sure she won't be able to return." When the little foxes of the Fox Zen school heard this, their uneasy hearts immediately relaxed. They chattered one after another, "Yes, leader is here. There's nothing to be afraid of." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Let's go. Don't delay here. Everyone, just pay more attention later." The group of people walked through the long corridor and followed the sound of ping-tan. After walking for about 10 meters, they stopped in front of a small 2-story building. Li Yundong took a look and saw that it was an ancient building with flying eaves and black tiles and white walls. On the 4 eaves of the first and second floors stood 4 divine beasts, namely the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, and the black tortoise. Under the 4 divine beasts, there was a bell hanging. When the breeze blew, it made a crisp sound, which was particularly pleasant to the ear, and the soft and pleasant sound of ping-tan. Li Yundong looked around and saw that although the courtyard in front of the building was not big, there were lakes, stones, and rockery. Moreover, the shape was lifelike, the structure was rigorous, and the levels were clear. At first glance, he could tell that it had been designed by a master. The rarest thing was that along the way, Li Yundong didn't find the slightest similarity in the scenery. There were really mountain paths, caves, valleys, dangerous roads, and cliffs all over the rockery. It was really a feeling of looking at all sides of the mountain, and the scenery changed step by step. Li Yundong couldn't help but praise with a smile, "Even if there is a trap here, the person who designed it is also an elegant person." After that, he walked inside with the girls. As soon as he entered the door, he saw 2 couplets. The first one was, "The hills and ravines are in the chest. Looking at the stacked stones and sparse springs, there is a natural painting book." The second one was, "Under the garden, I am willing to carry a zither and wine, and travel outside." Li Yundong couldn't help but cheer, "Good couplet, good couplet." His voice was so loud that Wang Jinyuan, who was upstairs, heard it and went downstairs. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Jinrenli, there are better couplets upstairs. Please come in. Li Yundong chuckled, cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan, and said, Master Wan, you are so elegant. Why didn't you choose this place for the Taoist assembly earlier? Sect Master Wan chuckled and said in a low voice, good treasures are always hidden and not willing to take them out. After that, he winked at Li Yundong and said, you'll know when you go up and have a look later. Li Yundong was curious. He stepped upstairs and saw that it was already full of friends. They were all cultivators from various sects on the yacht. These cultivators were all focused in one direction. Some closed their eyes and shook their heads, looking intoxicated. Some nodded slightly with a smile on their faces, but none of them looked at Li Yundong. Li Yundong was surprised. He followed everyone's gaze and saw two women sitting upstairs. One of them was about 30 years old, wearing a purple cheongsam with gold rims and holding a sanxian in her hand. Her face was profile, and her appearance was quite good. Sitting next to her was a young woman, whose face was blocked. She was wearing a crisp cyan cheongsam with floral patterns and holding a pipa in her arms. She was playing it slowly. Li Yundong heard that her voice was clear and soft, and her Wunong soft language was pleasant to listen to. When it was clear, it sounded like the chirping of a white spirit in the mountains, lingering for 3 days. When it was soft, it sounded like honey making wine. It was so sweet that every pore of his seemed to have a sweet and soft feeling. Li Yundong was stunned. He looked back and saw that Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were also listening to the song in a daze. No one urged him to go forward. Li Yundong couldn't help but be curious. Which famous master is singing Pingtan? Why is she singing so well? Although he couldn't understand the Wunong soft language, he could vaguely feel a kind of delicate feeling when he listened to her singing. I wonder what this woman looks like since her voice is so beautiful. He couldn't help but walk upstairs quickly and stretch out his head to take a look. At first glance, he saw that the girl was about 16 or 17 years old. She was extremely beautiful, not inferior to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin. What was even rarer was that the girl had red lips and white teeth. She was delicate and pretty, and her eyes were like a clear spring flowing down from a mountain stream. It made people feel comfortable as if they were drinking fine wine, but there was no evil thought in their hearts. Li Yundong saw this and was secretly amazed. He turned his head and said to Su Chan and the others, who were listening in a daze, Hey, how long are you going to stand on the stairs? Only then did Su Chan and the others wake up from a dream. They followed Li Yundong up and sat in their seats. At this time, the cultivators at the next table noticed the arrival of Li Yundong and the others, but they only glanced at Li Yundong a few times before quickly looking away and listening to the girl continue to sing. After Li Yundong sat down, he looked at the two women who were singing Pingtan seriously. He saw that the woman holding the sanxian had thick makeup on her face, and her eyebrows were full of beauty. The girl next to her had a pair of bright pearl earrings on her ears and a pair of jade bracelets on her hands. When she plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers, the bracelets danced brightly, like a faint green afterimage, which was very beautiful. After listening for a while, Li Yundong suddenly found that Su Chan and the other little foxes of the Fox Zen school looked unhappy, so he whispered to Su Chan, What's wrong? Su Chan whispered to Li Yundong with a look of displeasure, I don't like it. Li Yundong smiled and said, Why? Do you think she's beautiful and sings well? Su Chan said angrily, No, she's singing The Investiture of the Gods. It happens to be the part where Jiang Taigong subdued Daji and subdued demons. Li Yundong said curiously, No way. Is it such a coincidence? It's quite appropriate. It just so happens that you have a group of little vixens here. Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said, You're so annoying. I don't like people calling me a vixen. Aren't we wronged? We didn't seduce anyone. Why do we have to bear this infamy? Li Yundong moved closer to Su Chan's ear and whispered with a smile, But you are a charming little vixen. I love you so much. Su Chan's ear was tickled by Li Yundong's breath. She giggled and said, "You're so annoying. Just now you were acting like a great cultivator, but now you're acting like a little hooligan. Don't you know where you are and who are around you? How embarrassing it is to be seen by others." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Fool, I just want you to know that don't think too much. With me here, you don't need to think about what others think. If someone dares to kill you, I'll kill him first." Hearing this, Su Chan's heart warmed and she smiled sweetly at Li Yundong. The two of them were talking intimately as if there was no one else around, but suddenly, they heard the thunderous applause in the small building. The girl had finished singing. Only then did Li Yundong look at the stage and see the young girl standing up with the pipa in her arms. Her posture was really graceful and graceful. She smiled shyly at the crowd, then turned around and went into the back room. After the girl entered the dressing room in the back room, the smile on her face immediately disappeared. She looked around vigilantly, then turned around and walked out of the back door of the back room. She came to a remote corner and whispered, "Master, master? Are you there?" "They're here." At this time, a person walked out of the corner. Her figure was hidden in the shadows, and her face could not be seen clearly. However, the voice of a woman could be heard. She said coldly, "Are they all here?" The girl nodded, and there was a hint of fear between her brows. She said softly, "Yes, they're all here." The woman snorted and said, "That's great. I've been planning for 9 years, and this day has finally come. Today, I'm going to wipe out the Fox Zen school and let all the cultivators in the world know the true colors of these vixens. I'll get up in the morning to make up for it. I'm really sleepy. I haven't slept well for a few days. I feel very uncomfortable. Sorry. Chapter 491. Go to watch net. After the cultivators in the small building waited for the woman who sang to leave, they did not come to their senses for a while, as if their ears were still echoing with the moving singing. After a long time, they sighed and said, "It's true that this song only exists in heaven. How many times can we hear it in the human world?" Well sung, well sung." Li Yundong also comforted Su Chan with a smile, "Maybe it's just a coincidence. It's not something that can be targeted at you." Su Chan propped her hands on the table and rested her chin in her palms. She pouted and said, "Maybe. Anyway, it sounds harsh to my ears." "Watch net." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Really? I feel that this little song calms my heart. The murderous intent and bloody smell of the previous Taoist assembly have been diluted a lot." Su Chan suddenly smiled and whispered to Li Yundong, "Yundong, shall I go up and sing for you?" Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "No way, here? By the way, you said you could sing a song. But how do you know how to sing Pingtan?" Su Chan said with a smile, "My master taught me." She knew a lot of things. There was nothing in the world that she couldn't do. Moreover, I lived in Dongwu City with my master for a while, so I learned the dialect here and some Pingtan. Yundong, you have to listen to me sing for you when you go back. You have to. Li Yunyang laughed. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Wang Jinyuan cupping his hands to the cultivators of the various sects and saying, "Everyone. I'm really sorry for what happened at the Taoist assembly. I, Wang Jinyuan, would like to apologize to everyone here." The cultivators of the various sects laughed. Someone said loudly, "Master Wan, you should have brought us to such a good place a long time ago." "That's right, sect leader Wan. Seeing that your place is not bad and much better than that broken yacht, we'll forgive you." "Sect leader Wan, you're not kind at all, keeping a mistress in your house. These two beauties, one big and one small, must have. Among them, Dang Chang's voice was the loudest. He said loudly, "Sect Master Wan, call that little girl out again. At least let us know her name." Someone next to him immediately made fun of him and said, "Dang Chang, do you want to eat the cradle?" Dang Chang rubbed his head and said loudly, "Am I that old? Look at me. I haven't even had a single strand of white hair. How am I old? Everyone looked at Dang Chong's bald head and laughed. Dang Chong, you don't have a single hair on your head. Someone laughed loudly and said, Dang Chong, when you took off all your clothes just now, I saw that the hair down there was white. When everyone heard this, they burst into laughter. Li Yundong was listening to them with a smile, but when he heard this, he almost spat out a mouthful of tea. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Aren't these people too rude? Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, suddenly pursed her lips and said with a smile, Master, you used to be much rougher than them. Li Yundong pretended to be surprised. Really? How thick is it? This sentence had a double meaning, and Zhou Qin's cheeks immediately turned red. She muttered in a low voice, I said you were fat, and you really did it. You're so annoying. Su Chan, Wan Hongling, and the little foxes all laughed. Zi Yuan was also quite smiling. She said, you are now only one step away from becoming a great cultivator. Naturally, you can't be as careless as before. Moreover, cultivation is about cultivating your body and qi. If you are still the same as before, then your kung fu will be in vain. Li Yundong said to Zhou Qin with a smile, did you see that? Zi Yuan is so kind. How can your disciple ruin my show in public? While they were talking, they saw Dang Chong arguing with someone about the color of his hair. A cultivator laughed loudly and said, Dang Chong, don't make trouble. We are still waiting to listen to a little song. That's right. Master Wan, call the little girl up and sing another song. I haven't heard such a beautiful song for a long time. Wan Jinyuan laughed and said, everyone, please excuse me. If you want to listen to a little song, of course you can. However, do we still have to fight? Or should we have a duel and sing a song? Everyone burst into laughter, and for a moment, the hostility of all the sects dissipated a lot. Wan Jinyuan glanced at Li Yundong and Yu Sheng and said with a smile, Jinrenyu, please? Yu Sheng stood up expressionlessly, walked into the field, and cupped his hands to Li Yundong. Jinrenyu, shall we have a competition? Li Yundong chuckled. He looked around and said, Jinrenyu, look at the narrow space upstairs, and there is a lot of antique furniture. If we fight, I'm afraid this building will be destroyed. This place is so quiet and elegant. It would be a pity to destroy it. Moreover, it would ruin the scenery if we fought. I think it would be better for us to sit and fight. What do you think? Yu Sheng was stunned and asked, how can we fight while sitting? Li Yundong stood up, cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan, and said with a smile, Master Wan, please make an empty table. Wan Jinyuan smiled and said, no problem. After that, he ordered his subordinates to vacate a table in the center of the field. Li Yundong walked to the table and said to Yu Sheng with a smile, Jinrenyu, we agreed to fight with our yang spirit bodies, but since we are yang spirit bodies, we can change a lot. Why don't we use this table as a spirit space? The two of us can use our yang spirits and fight on the table? Yu Sheng also walked to the table and asked in confusion, how do we fight? Li Yundong chuckled and said, the yang spirit can change at will. Let's see whose change is more subtle and whose is more powerful. What do you think? Yu Sheng thought for a moment and said decisively, okay. Let's do as you say. Li Yundong smiled slightly. He didn't move, but soon a palm-sized little man jumped out of the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. This little man was like a miniature version of Li Yundong, looking at everyone with a smile on the table. Yu Sheng also remained calm. He quickly controlled his yang spirit body to turn into a little man and jumped onto the table. Li Yundong smiled and said, Jinrenyu, why don't you go first? Yu Sheng didn't stand on ceremony. He immediately turned his yang spirit into a white tiger. Although this tiger was small, the character, Wang, on its forehead was prominent, and its mane was majestic. No one dared to look down on it. Li Yundong smiled and said, what a white tiger. Watch me. As he spoke, Li Yundong controlled the yang spirit to turn into an azure dragon and fight with Yu Xing's white tiger. At this time, all the cultivators present were staring at the yang spirit of the two people fighting on the table. Even the woman who had been singing before and the girl who had returned at some point were looking up curiously. Zi Yuan, who was standing by the side of the field, saw Zhou Qin looking at the table in confusion, as if she didn't understand the mystery of this battle. She explained with a smile, "Zhou Qin, do you remember that Erlangshan fought with the great sage, equal to heaven in the journey to the west?" Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat and she asked tentatively, could it be that the two of them kept changing, and then Erlangshan caught Sun Wukong? Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, exactly. The battle between Li Yundong and Yu Sheng is a competition of the changes of their yang spirits, to see who can change more and whose ability to change is more powerful. This battle doesn't seem to be as intense as the previous ones, but the consumption of Jinqi and effort is far greater than that of the previous ones. Moreover, look at this scene, Yu Sheng has transformed into a white tiger, while Li Yundong has chosen to transform into an azure dragon. The white tiger is the earth, and the azure dragon is the sky. Since ancient times, the sky has been greater than the earth, and the azure dragon is also ranked above the white tiger. Therefore, Li Yundong's transformation can suppress Yu Sheng. As she spoke, Yu Sheng's white tiger fought with Li Yundong's azure dragon for a while and gradually lost its strength. Yu Sheng frowned, and the white tiger immediately jumped out of the battle. It shook its body and turned into a burly man. This man was as muscular as a strong man, with a bare chest and exposed abdomen, wings on his back, 3 eyes on his forehead, but his face was red like a monkey's. His feet were like an eagle's, his left hand was holding a wedge, and his right hand was holding an awl. He hit the huge drum hanging from his waist and abdomen with both hands. There was a loud crack on the table, and a small bolt of lightning struck down toward the azure dragon transformed from Li Yundong's yang spirit. Zi Yuan was shocked. This is Thunder God. Yu Sheng's yang spirit is really powerful. What a good transformation. Zhou Qin asked curiously, can Thunder God suppress the azure dragon? Zi Yuan smiled and said, of course. The azure dragon is just a divine beast, while the Thunder God is a god. Divine beasts are divine beasts, and the gods are in front of the beasts. Therefore, when the gods appear, all divine beasts have to surrender. Moreover, since ancient times, which divine beast has not been the mount of the immortals? Zhou Qin asked anxiously, Master, will you also become a god? Zi Yuan shook her head and said with a smile, then it will become a head-on fight again. There is rarely a difference between the gods. If you want to determine who is stronger, you can only fight head-on. Both of them are masters. If they really fight, I'm afraid this building will not be able to survive. As the two of them were talking, Li Yundong suddenly shook his body. The azure dragon instantly turned into a small earthworm and drilled into the table. Zi Yuan immediately nodded slightly and praised, not bad, Li Yundong really has the demeanor of a great cultivator. Zhou Qin said curiously, Master, you've been so aggrieved that you've turned into an earthworm. How can you still have the demeanor of a great cultivator? Zi Yuan smiled and said, what is a dragon? Dragons can soar above the 9th heaven, but they can also hide under the 9th earth. Although the thunder god is powerful, the art of thunder and lightning can't hit the earthworm hiding under the ground. All things in the world reinforce and restrain each other, and one thing subdues another. When Yu Sheng saw that all the thunder and lightning from his thunder god had failed, he snorted and immediately turned the thunder god into a rooster. He lowered his head and pecked at Li Yundong, who was hiding on the table with his hard beak. Unexpectedly, when he pecked out, Li Yundong had turned from an earthworm into a big python in the blink of an eye, tightly entangling the rooster. Yu Sheng's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately turned into a civet and turned around to bite Li Yundong. Everyone saw that Li Yundong and Yu Sheng were changing constantly. Almost every change would not last more than 5 seconds. Sometimes, they would even change several times in a row in the blink of an eye, which was too much for their eyes to take in and they couldn't react. Everyone present stared at the table with their eyes wide open, for fear of missing any changes. Even Wang Jinyuan looked at the field with a shocked expression. He thought to himself, this Yu Sheng is really powerful. No wonder he is known as the best of the younger generation of the Chuanjin dragon sect. But why is Li Yundong's yang spirit also so powerful? He's young and hasn't cultivated for long. How on earth did he cultivate? While he was muttering to himself, he saw a subordinate come over and whisper a few words in his ear. Wang Jinyuan glanced at him unhappily, blaming him for disturbing him from watching such a wonderful, intense, and unique battle. But when he heard the words of his subordinate, he was stunned and couldn't help asking, are they foreigners? They want to watch our Taoist assembly? The subordinate nodded and said, yes, that's what they said. Wang Jinyuan waved his hand impatiently and said, no, I don't care how they know about the Taoist assembly, but foreigners can't come. But as he spoke, he heard footsteps coming from the stairwell, and 3 people came up unhurriedly from downstairs. The one in the lead was an innocent and pretty little girl dressed in a gorgeous kimono. Behind her was a short old man with a pale face. Behind the old man was a tall young man with a docile face. These 3 people were none other than Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako from the Shingen Tantrism of Mount Koya in Japan. This was the update from yesterday. Chapter 492. Go to watch net. When Wang Jinyuan saw Xinyan and the others, he was stunned. Although he was unhappy, he still stepped forward politely and asked, I'm Wang Jinyuan, the sect leader of the Gazao sect. Why have you come uninvited? Xinyan also put his palms together politely, bowed in standard and fluent Chinese, and said, Amitba, I'm Xinyan from the Xinyan Tantrism of Mount Koya, Japan. This time, I brought my disciples Shinsu and Tachibana Wakako to the Cold Mountain Temple in Dongwu City to pay homage to the founder of our Xinyan Tantrism, Master Hirofa. I heard that the Quadrennial Taoist Assembly of China will be held here, so I specially came to pay a visit. Wang Jinyuan said calmly, Master Xinyan, Buddhism and Taoism are 2 different schools. Your Xinyan Tantrism has come to our Taoist assembly uninvited. I'm afraid it's not appropriate, right? Xinyan chuckled. Of course not. Although Buddhism and Taoism were 2 different schools, Buddhism and Taoism cultivation were indeed of the same origin. I once heard that the leader of the Gazao sect, the leader of the external alchemy sect in mainland China, is a righteous and wise cultivation leader. I think Master Wan, you should understand this, right? When Wang Jinyuan saw that Xinyan had given him a big hat, he was very happy and felt proud. But when he looked around, he saw that the attention of many cultivators had been attracted. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should let the 3 Japanese come up. Watch net. 7 KOM. At this time, Xinyan sighed, touched Tachibana Wakako beside him, and said, Look, Tachibana Wakako, I told you that they wouldn't agree, right? I told you that there are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China, and cultivation is the best in the world. The rules of each sect are very strict, especially at this kind of Taoist assembly. Outsiders are not allowed to enter. You didn't believe me, so you insisted on coming. Now look at you, you've been given the cold shoulder, haven't you? Tachibana Wakako also understood Chinese. At this time, her eyes were wide open, and her dark eyes were full of surprise and grievance. She pouted and muttered in her heart, It's true that I clamored to come. But you didn't say that cultivation in China is the best in the world. When Wang Jinyuan heard this, he saw that the little girl was looking at Xinyan and then at him. He suddenly smiled, nodded, and said, What Master Xinyan said makes sense. What's more, the sage once said, It's a pleasure to have friends from afar. Since the 3 of you came all the way here because of its reputation, we, the Great China, should not be lacking in etiquette. However, the 3 of you must abide by the rules and watch the battle from the sidelines. When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was overjoyed. She bowed deeply to Wang Jinyuan and said, thank you very much. I've troubled you. Xinyan also smiled and saluted Wan Jinyuan, saying, thank you for making an exception, Master Wan. If you come to our Mount Koya as a guest in the future, I will definitely entertain you warmly. Wan Jinyuan chuckled and ordered his subordinates to lead the three of them to a table and sit down. At this time, Xinyan, Shinsu, and Tachibana Wakako happened to sit down at Li Yunyang's table. As soon as they sat down, Tachibana Wakako said to Xinyan in Japanese with an unhappy face, Master Xinyan, how can you wrongly accuse me? I'm not the only one who said I would come to the Taoist assembly. Moreover, as a monk, you are dishonest and you lie. When did you say that cultivation in China is the best in the world? Xinyan laughed. He was not angry. He just patted the innocent Tachibana Wakako's head and said with a smile, Tachibana Wakako, you saw it. These cultivators in China don't have much ability, but they have a bad temper. They have been immersed in the beautiful dream of their own country and the most glorious history of Taoism in the Song, Yuan Ming and Ming dynasties. So when I give them a little bit of praise, they get carried away. If I didn't compliment them, would they have let us in? Only then did Tachibana Wakako understand. She made a face at Xinyan with a smile and whispered, Master Xinyan, you're so amazing. You've deceived these self-righteous Chinese cultivators. Xinyan snorted, waved his hand, and said, if it weren't for you, how could I have done such a thing? Tachibana Wakako, didn't you want to watch the Taoist assembly fight? Now you can watch as much as you want. Tachibana Wakako looked at the field and saw that Li Yunyang and Yu Sheng were both sitting at a square table at this time. There were their own yang spirits on the table, constantly changing. Sometimes they were fighting and wrestling, and sometimes they were chasing each other for their lives. Tachibana Wakako was a child, and she was delighted to see the prey. She turned to Shinsu and said with a smile, Shinsu, that guy is the guy we met at Shiyuan Temple. What do you think of his ability? Shinsu glanced at the field, quickly lowered his eyes, and said with a faint expression, I'm not interested. Tachibana Wakako pouted and said, you're so annoying. I think it's very interesting. After that, she ignored Shinsu and began to watch with great interest. At this time, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Zi Yuan, and the little foxes, who were sitting to one side, heard them talking in Japanese. They all turned their heads to look at them. Su Chan muttered in a low voice, why are there Japanese here? Ruan Hongling also whispered to Zi Yuan, Shiji Zi Yuan, what are they talking about? Zi Yuan looked a little displeased. She gave Xinyan a meaningful look and said in a low voice, nothing. Let's ignore them and continue to watch Li Yunyang and Yusheng fight. Only then did everyone turn their faces and continue to look at the field. At this time, the battle between Li Yunyang and Yusheng had become white-hot. The two of them were controlling their respective yang spirits to constantly change according to each other's changes. Every time the two of them changed, they would immediately change again. In just a few minutes, the round table had changed dozens of times. The change of the yang spirit consumed a lot of Jinqi. Not long after the two of them fought, white steam rose from the top of their heads. Yusheng's forehead was already covered with fine sweat and his face was pale, while Li Yunyang's face was red, as if he had drunk strong wine. At first, the changes of the two of them were extremely fast, but slowly, Yusheng's changes slowed down. His face also became paler and paler, gradually becoming as pale as a thin piece of paper, while Li Yundong's face became redder and redder, like a red-faced Guan Yu. Although his appearance was abnormal, his eyes were still crystal clear and deep, like the endless sea. There was still inexhaustible energy left. Not only did his changes not slow down, they even showed signs of speeding up. When everyone saw this, they were secretly shocked. In the first battle, Li Yundong and Chen Yunyan were competing in controlling thunder, which was a competition of the explosive power of Jinqi. In the second battle, Li Yundong and Sun Beidian were competing in the 5 elements, which was a competition of the subtle control of Jinqi. In the third battle, Li Yundong and Yusheng were competing in the changes of the yang spirit, which was a competition of the endurance of Jinqi. Li Yundong had fought 3 battles in a row, and his explosive power and control had reached an abnormal level. How could his endurance be so strong and his Jinqi so deep? Tachibana Wakako, who was on the sidelines, saw that Li Yundong and Yu Sheng looked different. She couldn't help asking curiously, Master Xinyan, why is one of them red and the other white? He, it's like they're singing an opera. Xinyan chuckled and said, the white face is pale because the Jinqi in his body has been consumed too much. As for the red face, it's because the Jinqi in his body is running too fast and too vigorously. Tachibana Wakako asked in confusion, then why? Xinyan knew that although Tachibana Wakako was also a cultivator, she practiced witchcraft and the art of god possession. She relied on the powerful power of ghosts and gods brought to herself through faith and contract. This was completely different from the cultivation methods of the cultivators in mainland China, so she couldn't understand these cultivation techniques at all. Xinyan explained with a smile, the cultivation techniques of Chinese Taoism are different from those of our Zhenyan Tantrism. They cultivate essence, qi, and blood, refining the 3 essences of the human body into Jinqi through a special method of qi circulation. Because the white face has consumed too much Jinqi, he has to desperately mobilize the essence, qi, and blood in his body and quickly transform these 3 essences into Jinqi to ensure that he can persist in the battle. But he's drinking poison to quench his thirst. He can't hold on for a long time. The essence, qi, and blood in his body are greatly damaged, so his face is pale. As he spoke, Xinyan pointed to Li Yundong and said, look at this red face. It's because the Jinqi in his body is too majestic that his face is too red. Tachibana Wakako seemed to understand and said, will running Jinqi too fast cause one's face to turn red? Xinyan nodded and said, yes, because Jinqi is very illusory. It exists in the meridians of the human body, but its transportation and mobilization are driven by qi and blood. And blood is mobilized by qi. Qi and blood are the commander of blood. To mobilize Jinqi, one must first circulate qi. After that, it will drive the speed of the blood flow in the body and mobilize Jinqi. When the speed of the Jinqi reaches a certain intensity and height, the speed of the blood flow in the human body will become faster and faster, and his skin will become redder and redder. Tachibana Wakako suddenly understood and said, ah, I see. Is it the same as running a marathon? Xinyan nodded slightly and said, although it's not correct, it's not far from the truth. Tachibana Wakako clapped her hands and said with a smile, then won't this battle be over soon? Xinyan chuckled and said, if I'm not wrong, the winner will be decided in 10 seconds. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw that Yusheng finally couldn't hold on any longer. His last transformation happened to be into a white tiger, and Li Yundong immediately changed into an azure dragon. At this time, Yusheng's Jinqi was almost exhausted, and he could no longer change. Yusheng's Jinqi was seriously overdrawn. His body swayed, and his lips were a little dry. He forced a smile at Li Yundong and said in a hoarse voice, Jinrenli, I admit defeat. Li Yundong also smiled slightly and withdrew his yang spirit. He chuckled and said, Jinrenyu, you're too modest. Yusheng waved his hand. After withdrawing his yang spirit, he took a deep breath and slowly adjusted his qi. After a little breath, he asked, Jinrenli, there's something I don't understand and I want to ask you. Li Yundong saw that although Yusheng was arrogant, he was still an open and above-board person. He was not like the previous 2 who had many tricks. He had a good impression of Yusheng, so he said with a smile, Jinrenyu, ask away. Yusheng asked with a surprised and doubtful expression, Jinrenli, just now I changed 108 times, and you also changed 108 times. I want to ask you, if I don't admit defeat, how many more times can you change? Li Yundong smiled and controlled his yang spirit to jump onto the table again. Without saying a word, he began to change again. This time, he clearly changed the things that had changed when they had fought before. In the end, he said with a smile, Jinrenyu, I can change things like this for 3 days and 3 nights. When these words were said, the cultivators of all sects present were so shocked that their faces turned pale. Yu Sheng was also a master in the cultivation world. When he competed with Li Yundong in the Yang spirit transformation, he could only last for 5 minutes before his Zhenyuan was exhausted. But Li Yundong actually said that he could last for 3 days and 3 nights. Was this true or false? Even if it was a lie, it didn't seem like it was a lie from the way he was getting more and more spirited the more he fought. But if it was true, then he was too terrifying, wasn't he? He had thought that he would run out of his Jinshi and get a bargain in the end. Now it seemed that this was simply a fool's dream. For a moment, everyone had their own thoughts. Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect drank his tea calmly, but his heart was in turmoil. He thought to himself, Li Yundong has only cultivated for half a year. I can understand that his Jinshi is strong. After all, he is a body reconstructed by the Jindan. I can also understand that his magic is amazing. Maybe he has had some adventures. But his Jinshi is so strong and his aura is so long that his Yang spirit transformation can last for 3 days and 3 nights. This shows that he has reached the realm of unity of heaven and man and self-sufficiency of the big and small universes. He is only 1 step away from the Jinshin phase. How could he be so powerful at such a young age? He must have practiced the long-lost heavenly Jindan technique. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to be so powerful. Seeing Li Yundong's miracle, Du Fei couldn't help but begin to think about how to exchange the heavenly Jindan technique with Li Yundong. Although Zhou Ping of the Jingyi school had always disliked Li Yundong, she couldn't help exclaiming in a low voice, 3 days and 3 nights? How is this possible? How can his aura be so long? Zhang Ling snorted coldly and said, this man must have practiced the heavenly Jindan technique and combined it with Renyuan Jindan. That's why he is so powerful. Master, I have a way to get the heavenly Jindan technique. Zhou Ping turned her head and whispered a few words into Zhang Ling's ear. Hearing this, Zhang Ling narrowed her eyes and revealed a thoughtful expression. She slowly said, we'll talk about this when we get back. We need to make a good plan. Wang Zhenyuan saw that after this battle, the faces of the cultivators of all sects could not help but show fear and despair. Li Yundong's strength had far exceeded everyone's expectations. It was not terrible for a person to have powerful magic, nor was it terrible for a person to be proficient in the 5 elements. However, if a person's magic was powerful and proficient in the 5 elements, his Jinshi was incomparably majestic, and his aura was long and continuous, like a vast river that would never dry up, then this person was simply an unbeatable monster. Wang Zhenyuan looked at Li Yunyang in shock and thought to himself, this guy's cultivation speed is too fast. His current cultivation quotient has far surpassed that of cultivators of the same age. He's almost catching up with the old guys in the cultivation world. Terrible, really terrible. Can the old fox really control such a terrible guy? At this time, Yu Sheng smiled bitterly. He made an obeisance by cupping his hands to Li Yundong and said, Jinrenli, I'm convinced. You are powerful, and I'm not as good as you. But just because I'm not as good as you today doesn't mean that I won't be as good as you tomorrow. One day, I will surpass you. Li Yundong smiled slightly. Jinren, you're exaggerating. Yu Sheng forced a smile and walked to his seat. He lowered his head and said nothing. No matter how Wei Qing, who was next to him, teased him and made him happy, he did not say a word. Seeing that Yu Sheng, who was usually arrogant, had been defeated like this, Wang Zhenyuan couldn't help but smile bitterly. He cupped one hand in the other before his chest and said to the cultivators of the other sects, everyone, who else wants to fight? At this moment, how could any cultivator dare to step forward? All of them were fearful, and their eyes were evasive. Seeing this, Wang Zhenyuan could only smile bitterly and say, everyone, if no one comes up, I can only announce that Jinrenli has won. Ding Nan, who was sitting in the corner, said to Zhenyuan in a low voice, Master, do you still want to fight with Li Yundong? He's so strong. Zhenyuan chuckled and a sinister smile appeared on his face. He whispered, if I want to defeat him, I don't need to fight at all. Look at my... As he spoke, he was about to stand up. However, he had just moved when he suddenly saw someone suddenly stand up and shout, wait a moment. I have something to say. 8. Yeah. Chapter 493. Go to watch net. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw that it was Zhang Cuni of the Qingqing sect who was speaking. Go to watch net. Zheng Yuan, who had wanted to make things difficult for him, was stunned for a moment. He sat down again and wanted to see what Zhang Cuni wanted to say. Zhang Cuni stood up, cupped his hands to Li Yundong, and said, Jinren Li, there's one thing I don't understand. I want to ask you for advice. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Jinren Zhang, if you have something to say, please say it. Zhang Cuni said loudly, I want to ask you, Jinren Li, do you think this immortal pen is a powerful magical weapon of our Taoism? Li Yundong was stunned. He didn't know what Zhang Cuni's words meant. He said, Jinren Zhang, the immortal pen is the personal magical weapon of Zhua Ci, the founder of our Taoist Danding sect. Of course, it's a great magical weapon. Zhang Cuni nodded and asked again, does such a powerful magical weapon have earth-shattering power? Li Yundong became more and more confused. This powerful magical weapon can write talismans out of thin air. Of course, it has earth-shattering power. Jinren Zhang, what do you mean by asking this? Zhang Cuni turned a deaf ear to Li Yundong's question. He said again, Jinren Li, I want to ask you, if such a powerful magical weapon falls into the hands of evil people, what should we do? Li Yundi raised his eyebrows and said, then we righteous people should naturally enforce justice on behalf of heaven and take back our Taoist powerful magical weapon. Such a powerful magical weapon must not fall into the hands of evil people. Zhang Cuni asked again, but this person is too strong. What if we can't beat him? Although Li Yundong felt strange in his heart, he thought that he had a clear conscience in his life, so he said loudly, what are you talking about? Do we have to bow our heads if the evil forces are too strong? If one of us can't beat him, two of us can do it. If two of us can't beat him, we can do it together. We can't let the world become a place where evil people run rampant and good people are bullied, can we? Zhang Cuni laughed. He pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, Jinren Li, I advise you not to get this immortal pen. Li Yundong was stunned. What do you mean? Zhang Cuni sneered and said, otherwise, you will become the villain that everyone will attack. Although Li Yundong had stayed in the spirit space for many years and his temper had almost been worn out, when he heard someone accusing him out of nothing, he couldn't help but get angry. He glared at him and said angrily, Jinren Zhang, don't slander me. Slander? Zhang Cuni snorted coldly. He turned around and shouted to the cultivators of all sects present, you can be witnesses here and let us see the true face of this evil man. At this time, everyone was stunned. They didn't expect that Zhang Cuni would suddenly attack and accuse Li Yundong of being a big villain. They immediately perked up. They widened their eyes and pricked up their ears to listen. A cultivator who was eager to see the world in chaos said loudly, Jinren Zhang, tell us quickly. We are listening. That's right, what's going on? Zhang Cuni snorted and asked Li Yundong loudly, Jinren Li, did you open a tea house on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City? Li Yundong felt strange. He nodded and said, yes, the whole cultivation world should know about this. Why are you asking me? Zhang Cuni sneered and said, yes, everyone in the cultivation world knows that you have opened a tea house on the pedestrian street of Tiannan City, but how many cultivators in the world know that your tea house is actually a black shop that makes a living by swindling and bullying people? When everyone heard this, there was an uproar and they all looked at Li Yundong in surprise. When Su Chan heard this, there was a buzzing sound in her head. She couldn't help but open her mouth wide, and a messy voice in her head shouted, oh no, that matter has really caused trouble for Yundong. What should I do? What should I do? The little foxes were also dumbfounded. They looked at each other in horror and fear, and all of them were trembling. When Li Yundong heard this, he was shocked at first, and then he became angry. He shouted, "Zhang Cuni, make it clear, or you won't be able to get away with it today." Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "Jinrenli, don't you dare to admit what you've done?" As he said this, he turned around and loudly told the crowd about how his uncle had been robbed in the Desanxian tea house. He gritted his teeth and said loudly with a face full of hatred, "Fellow Taoists, Jinren. I think everyone knows that when Jinrenli opened the Desanxian tea house a month ago, it was really vigorous and lively. How many high-ranking officials and prominent people came? I, Zhang Cuni, still remember it vividly. Even the inauguration ceremony of the leader of our Qingyang palace didn't have so many high-ranking officials and nobles. But when Li Yundong opened a small tea house, so many people came. How powerful and amazing is this?" His words were the opposite of the truth. For a moment, everyone whispered to each other and said, "Yes, even the secretary of the provincial party committee came that day. This is a big deal." Well, it's true. Li Yundong's power is not small. Zhang Cuni's tone changed and he sneered. But Jinrenli doesn't use his power for the right way. Instead, he only wants to take the crooked way and the unorthodox way. Jinrenli, are you relying on your powerful background and power to act so recklessly and persecute the people? At this time, everyone looked at Li Yundong with unkind eyes. Originally, they were afraid of Li Yundong because he was too strong. At this time, they finally found an excuse and a place to vent. The emotions hidden in their hearts suddenly broke out. Everyone shouted, "This scum is really a shame to our cultivation world. Kill him. Justice for heaven. Hey, can you kill him? I can't do it alone. There are so many people here, right? Forget it. It's better for you to die than for me. If you want to be cannon fodder, I won't accompany you." There were also some old and prudent cultivators who said to Li Yundong loudly, "Jinrenli, is that true? Jinrenli, say something." Wang Jinyuan saw that the situation on the scene had suddenly changed. The situation had changed from one side to the other. This was not what Wang Jinyuan wanted to see. He had to stand up and say loudly, "Don't quarrel, everyone. I believe that Jinrenli will give us an explanation." After that, he said to Li Yundong, "Jinrenli, whether this matter is true or not, I think you should say something." At this time, there was no joy or anger on Li Yundong's face, but he was shocked and angry in his heart. He had never thought that he would encounter such a thing on such an occasion. Moreover, he had heard the details clearly from Zhang Cuni, and the time matched. According to his understanding of Su Chan, this little girl could indeed do such a thing. He had already believed half of it in his heart. Li Yundong turned his head to look at his table, only to see that Su Chan was looking at him with a look of panic. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He knew that this matter must be true. Zheng Yuan, who was not far away, observed their expressions. He chuckled and whispered to Ding Nan, "Hey, Zhang Cuni seems to have a rough temper, but I didn't expect him to be so meticulous. He happens to be the same as me. I thought I was the only one who had collected these things." Ding Nan suppressed the worry in her heart and asked, "But there's no evidence for this kind of thing. How can it be counted without evidence?" Zheng Yuan chuckled and said, "No evidence? I have a lot of evidence in my hands." Zhang Cuni dared to suddenly make trouble on such an occasion. He must have ironclad evidence in his hands. Otherwise, he would never dare to make trouble like this. No wonder he dared to say that he could win first place. It turns out that he had prepared such a backup plan. Ding Nan looked at Zhang Cuni with disdain. She sneered and said, "Even if he gets what he wants, is he sure to win first place?" Zheng Yuan sneered and said, "Zhang Cuni has the Sanhuang sword in his hand, and Yu Sheng has been eliminated. Now he has a great chance of winning. Hee, I have to help him again and light the fire again." After that, he stood up and said to Zhang Cuni with a smile on his face, "Jinren Zhang, you've said so much, but it's all empty talk. There's no evidence. You can't wrongly accuse a good person. I don't think Zhenrenli is such a bad person. When Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the others heard that Jing Yuan had stood up to speak for Li Yundong, they all opened their mouths wide in surprise and looked at each other. Ruan Hongling was tongue-tied and whispered, "What's this guy up to?" Only Zhou Qin thought for a moment, then immediately became furious. She gritted her teeth and said, "This person deserves to die. He's fanning the flames." Sure enough, Zhang Cuni glanced at Jing Yuan and sneered. He took out a piece of paper from his bosom. With a shake of his hand, he shook the paper and said loudly, "I have recorded the confessions of all the witnesses who have been victims. They are all in Dongwu City now. Do you want me to call them over for a face-to-face confrontation?" The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar. Everyone believed what Zhang Cuni had said in his heart, especially when they looked at Li Yundong's table. They saw that Su Chan and the other little foxes were trembling all over and in a panic. They had a guilty look on their faces. They no longer had any doubts. They glared at Li Yundong and said loudly, "Zhenrenli, you tell us what to do." "Li Yundong, I didn't expect you to be such a shameless person." Jing Yuan also said loudly to Li Yundong with a pained expression, "Zhenrenli, I didn't expect you to be so unclean and do such a thing that will anger both men and gods. Although it seems to be a small evil, if small evil is not punished, what if it leads to a big evil in the future?" As soon as he said this, everyone immediately responded loudly, "That's right, that's right." Zhang Cuni saw that the crowd was in an uproar, and he was secretly proud of himself. He took advantage of the victory and said, "Zhenrenli, do you think a big villain like you is qualified to take a Taoist treasure like ours? Do you deserve to use such a powerful magical weapon?" At this time, Su Chan finally couldn't stand it anymore. She stood up, trembling all over, and her eyes were full of tears. She shouted excitedly, "This has nothing to do with Yundong. I did it. It was all my idea. Don't force him. I will take responsibility for what I have done. If there is anything, I will take responsibility for it myself." Ling Yu, who was the initiator of the incident, couldn't help but stand up and say loudly, "It was my idea for Su Chan. If you want to blame someone, blame me." The little foxes also stood up and said loudly, "It's our fault. It has nothing to do with leader. Don't force him." Seeing so many beautiful little foxes protecting Li Yundong, some people were both surprised and envious, jealous and resentful. Some people said sarcastically, "Oh, they're so united. Zhenrenli, you've done a good job of protecting your disciples. Humph, nothing good has ever happened to these foxes since they entered the mortal world. Doesn't Li Yundong care about his own subordinates?" Zhang Cuni laughed and said, "Zhenrenli, you have a group of good disciples. I didn't expect them to sacrifice themselves to protect you." Su Chan was so excited that her whole body trembled. She said loudly, "When this happened, Yundong happened to go to Dongwu City. He didn't know about it. He was afraid that I would cause trouble, so he repeatedly told me. But I still caused trouble for him." As she spoke, the little girl finally couldn't hold back her tears. Big teardrops fell down. When everyone saw such a beautiful little girl like Su Chan crying like a pear blossom in the rain, they were all speechless for a moment. It was a pitiful thing for a beauty to cry. Those who had the slightest tenderness for the fairer sex couldn't bear to blame or force her. However, Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "What's the difference between you causing trouble and him causing trouble? Even if what you said is true, if Li Yundong didn't condone you, would you have been so bold as to do such a thing? Haven't you heard that when the master is in trouble, the disciple will do it for him? But when the disciple makes a mistake, the master will also have to bear the responsibility? What's more, Li Yundong is the leader of your Fox Zen school. If this matter isn't blamed on him, then who should it be blamed on? Humph, do you think that crying can make us soft-hearted and not pursue it?" Su Daiji caused chaos in the Shang dynasty and cried bitterly before she died, but Jiang Shang didn't soften his heart. Why? Because he was enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. Zheng Yuan, who was listening to this, secretly exclaimed, "That's amazing. Those words are really amazing. Li Yundong is in trouble now." Sure enough, at this time, everyone's eyes became united against a common enemy. They all shouted, "Li Yundong, you have to give us an explanation." Su Chan also said loudly, "Don't force him. I'll give you an explanation." Li Yundong had been standing quietly in the field. At first, he was furious and clenched his fists, but at this time, he calmed down and loosened his clenched fists. He turned his head, glared at Su Chan, and shouted, "Shut up and sit down." Su Chan was startled by Li Yundong's stare and sat down subconsciously. Only then did Li Yundong turn his head and look coldly at the excited crowd. He said to Zhang Cuni, "Zhenren Zhang, what do you think I should do?" Today, I will try to write 3 chapters to make up for yesterday. In addition, I will promote my Sina Weibo, /17499723242. Welcome everyone to check it out. Vote for recommendation. Previous page return to contents. Next page error report. If you like, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 494. Go to the internet. What should we do? Zhang Cuni snorted and said to the crowd, "What should we do?" When an emotional cultivator heard this, he shouted, "What do you mean, what should we do? Hand over the perpetrator and punish him severely. We must punish him severely." There was also a cultivator who said in a strange tone, "Fox spirits are evildoers. Generally, it's one thing for you to associate with evildoers, but you don't even know how to discipline them properly. Now that such a thing has happened, I think it's time for you to be the leader of the Fox Zen school." Zhou Ping of the Jingyi school saw that there was such a great opportunity to vent her anger, so she said loudly, "There are 2 ways to choose. The first way is for you to put righteousness before family. The second way is for you to resign from the position of leader of the Fox Zen school, withdraw from the Taoist assembly, and never participate in it again." When everyone heard this, they all glanced at Zhou Ping and thought to themselves, "A woman's heart is the most vicious." That's right. Zhou Ping is really ruthless. Zhang Cuni sneered and said, "Is that all you want? What about those who are bullied and swindled? Generally, your desanxion must be closed, and you must pay 10 times the compensation. Moreover, you must apologize to everyone publicly and swear not to associate with these evildoers again." Only then did everyone realize that Zhou Ping was not the most ruthless person. Zhang Cuni was. Zhou Ping had just vented her anger, but Zhang Cuni had cut off her source of income and slapped her in the face. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. If they lost their reputation, what was the point of becoming an immortal? At this time, everyone looked at him, wanting to see how this young cultivator would choose. Go to the internet. At this time, Ziyuan also clenched her fists involuntarily. Her eyes widened as she looked nervously at the field. At this moment, she seemed to have returned to 10 years ago. Hadn't her master, Wang Yuansheng, fallen in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen school and eventually turned against all the sects in the cultivation world? Why was the scene from back then repeating itself now? Back then, those people had forced her master like this. Why were they forcing him now? Why were things so shockingly similar? Ziyuan's heart was in a mess. This fairy, who was usually calm and collected, was in a mess. She couldn't help but think, back then, for Ao Wushuang, master didn't hesitate to leave the sect and turn against the cultivation world. Li Yundong, what will he do? Li Yundong listened to the words of Zhou Ping and Zhang Cuni expressionlessly. After they finished speaking, he was silent for a while and suddenly laughed softly. Then his laughter slowly grew louder, as if disdain and ridicule were brewing in his throat. Gradually, his laughter became louder and louder, as if the thunderclouds in the 9th heaven were rolling, rumbling, shaking the teacups on the table, and rippling the tea. Zhang Cuni could hear the mockery in Li Yundong's laughter. He shouted angrily, Li Yundong, what are you laughing at? Could it be that you are so arrogant that you think you can make an enemy out of all the cultivation sects in the world? Li Yundong laughed loudly. Without looking at Zhang Cuni, he said to the crowd, does everyone have the same opinion? Everyone looked at each other for a moment. Most of the cultivators didn't want such a powerful newcomer like Li Yundong to appear and steal the limelight of the various sects, so they all agreed loudly. Du Fei, Wei Qing, and the others, who sympathized with Li Yundong, didn't dare to force themselves to stand up because the situation was one-sided against Li Yundong, so they also chose to remain silent. Seeing that everyone was adding insult to injury, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh wildly. His laughter was even more arrogant than before. Everyone was irritated by Li Yundong's laughter. Someone shouted, Li Yundong, why are you so arrogant? Do you think you are invincible in the world? Li Yundong laughed and said, I'm not laughing for anything else. I'm just laughing at how naive you are. Do you think you can force me to obediently obey you with these words? When everyone heard this, they were furious. Some of them stood up and pointed at Li Yundong, cursing loudly. Some of the more mature ones were also angry. They frowned and stared at Li Yundong. Li Yundong acted as if he hadn't heard their words or seen their threatening eyes. He looked at Zhang Cuni coldly and said, Zhenren Zhang, I already know what you said. I also believe that what you said is true. Since someone in my sect has made a mistake, I will go back and punish them myself. It's not up to you to tell me what to do. This is a private matter of my Fox Zen school. What right do you have to decide what I should and shouldn't do here? After that, Li Yundong pointed to Su Chan, Ling Yu, and the other little foxes and said, I will take responsibility for the mistakes they made because I am their leader. I will definitely pay for what needs to be paid, but I will never close the tea house. I will definitely apologize, but I will definitely not apologize to you, but to the victims. As for the Taoist assembly, humph, don't you just want me to withdraw from the Taoist assembly? Well, I won't fight for the immortal pen. I'll let you fight for it. Li Yundong looked at the crowd with a sneer and said, Are you satisfied now? Everyone looked at each other. Some of them with ulterior motives saw that their purpose of making Li Yundong withdraw from the competition had been achieved, so they stopped making noise. On the contrary, some of them who were eager for justice said unrelentingly, Li Yundong, you are protecting your own people. Li Yundong looked coldly at the person who had spoken and said, I am. What are you going to do about it? These words made the man speechless. A cultivator who couldn't stand it any longer helped him and said, Li Yundong, you are helping the tyrant. As a cultivator, you should do justice for the heavens and punish your own people for righteousness. Hand over the culprit and let bygones be bygones. Su Chan was Li Yundong's Achilles heel, and these words touched Li Yundong's bottom line. Li Yundong suddenly flew into a rage. He glared at the man and roared, Say that again if you have the guts. This roar was really like a clap of thunder out of nowhere. It immediately made everyone's ears buzz. Everyone felt as if there was a fierce tiger roaring angrily in front of them. The man who had spoken before was almost scared out of his wits by Li Yundong's roar. He was so shocked that his face turned pale. He muttered subconsciously, but no one heard what he said. At this time, Li Yundong's hair was standing on end in anger. His eyes were as wide as copper bells, and his bones were crackling. He was like a beast that could choose to devour people at any time. He glanced at the crowd fiercely and coldly and said in a cold voice, Who else wants to do justice for the heavens and ask me to punish my own people for righteousness? Stand up and speak. Before this, everyone had seen Li Yundong as a quiet and modest man. Not only was he handsome, but his temperament was also elegant and scholarly. The other party had provoked him several times, but he just smiled slightly and treated it as a cool breeze blowing in his face. But at this time, Li Yundong suddenly became furious. He suddenly shook his body, as if he had turned into a giant beast. For a moment, everyone was so shocked that they subconsciously raised the jinqi in their bodies, guarding against Li Yundong's sudden attack. They had seen Li Yundong's ability and means before. Who would dare to reach out and touch his reverse scale again when he was so angry? Do justice for the heavens and punish his own people for righteousness? Come on. As the saying goes, a rabbit bites when cornered, and a dog jumps over a wall when cornered. This was a fierce tiger. If he was cornered, who knew what terrible things he would do? At this time, when everyone saw that Li Yundong had agreed to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, they had the idea of keeping the peace. Some righteous cultivators were so shocked by Li Yundong's roar that they didn't dare to say another word. At this time, Zhang Cuni also sighed and said hypocritically, "Jinrenli, you must think that I am targeting you, but have you ever thought that you are so strong and powerful that others can't do anything to you? Those victims want to sue you, but no one dares to accept it. But have you ever thought that if you are so angry now, those who have been bullied by you and your disciples will be angry?" Li Yundong looked at Zhang Cuni coldly and said, "Jinren Zhang, what other wise ideas do you have? You might as well say them all at once. Don't pretend to be sincere." Zhang Cuni's heart trembled under Li Yundong's gaze. He snorted and said, "I don't have any wise ideas. I'm just saying what I think. Jinrenli, since you have agreed to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, please sit down in your seat. I hope that from now on, you will restrain your disciples. Otherwise, although the world is big, there will be no place for your Fox Zen school." Li Yundong took a deep look at Zhang Cuni and didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked to his table and sat down. At this time, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Wan Hongling at the table all looked at Li Yundong with a complicated and inexplicable look. They admired Li Yundong because he was indeed a man with a sense of responsibility. He had carried everything on himself, but they sighed because Li Yundong must have offended most of the cultivation sects in the world by doing so. When the little girl saw Li Yundong sit down, she couldn't help looking at him with tears in her eyes. Her eyes were full of fear. She couldn't help saying in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, leader. I've caused you trouble again. I didn't want to." When Li Yundong saw the little girl crying like a pear blossom in the rain, his anger dissipated completely. He reached out under the table and gently grabbed her hand, saying softly, "I know. You want to prove yourself, don't you? It's actually my fault. I shouldn't have put so much pressure on you. Don't cry. We didn't do it well this time. Let's learn from our experience and do it well next time. Won't that be fine?" Su Chan had always felt a lot of pressure in her heart, especially in the face of Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, who could help Li Yundong. She had been worried all day that she would drag Li Yundong down, so she had been thinking about helping Li Yundong and proving herself. But in the end, she was still a hindrance. When the little girl heard Zhang Cuni's sudden attack, she really felt like the end of the world was coming, as if the sky had collapsed. What made Su Chan the most anxious was that she was afraid that Li Yundong would abandon her in a fit of rage and no longer want her. But at this time, after hearing Li Yundong's words, she realized how much Li Yundong loved her and how superfluous her thinking was. When Su Chan heard Li Yundong's calm words, she couldn't help crying out loud. The little girl choked and said, "But Sister Zhou Qin beat you so hard that you couldn't get the immortal pen, but I always helped you and made you unable to get the immortal pen. I'm really useless." Li Yundong smiled gently. He reached out his hand and stroked the little girl's cheek lovingly. "Silly girl. Didn't I say it before? How can a dead thing replace a living thing? How can the immortal pen be compared to you? Besides, if I were still the poor boy I used to be, would you still want me?" Su Chan looked at him with tears in her eyes and nodded. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Look, isn't that right? Back then, you liked me because I was good to you, not because I was rich or not, or because I was capable or not. I liked you back then because you were innocent and naive, and because you never despised me. So, even if you break the sky, as long as you are still the innocent, lovely, kind, and simple little girl, I will help you mend the sky." When you love someone, you can't ask the other party to change just because you have changed. Since I love you back then, I have to accept all your advantages and disadvantages. You don't have to think about changing, and you don't have to change, because I love you. Su Chan was moved, and tears kept falling. She choked and said, I know, I won't hold you back anymore. Li Yundong laughed and reached out to help the little girl wipe the tears on her face. He smiled and said, Don't cry. There are so many people watching here. How embarrassing. Su Chan reached out and kept wiping her tears. She wanted to smile, but more tears flowed out. She wiped her tears and said with a smile, What if I can't control it? I just want to cry. What should I do? Li Yundong smiled and said, Then come to my arms and cry. Su Chan finally couldn't help it. She threw herself into Li Yundong's arms and cried bitterly. Yundong, why are you so good to me? Li Yundong stroked the little girl's soft black hair lovingly and said softly, Silly girl, if I don't treat you well, who should I treat well? The two of them talked intimately as if there was no one else around. For a moment, everyone in the small building heard them clearly. They all sat there in a daze, unable to speak for a long time. Everyone's eyes were fixed on this intimate pair. They were snuggled up to each other, as if no one could separate them even if the heavens and earth were to fall apart. Today's first update, second update. I don't know when I'll be able to update it, but in my current situation. Don't wait. It's possible that I'll have to update it tomorrow morning. 8. Let's go. Chapter 495. Go to Watch Network. The situation on the field was changing rapidly. Li Yundong had given up the immortal pen for Su Chan, which made the cultivators of various cultivation sects sigh inwardly. Li Yundong loved beauties more than he loved his country. In ancient times, he might have been another lustful and muddle-headed ruler. Li Yundong and Su Chan were talking intimately as if there was no one else around, but Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, who were watching from one side, were worried and full of mixed feelings. Go to watch. 7 K.O.M. Ruan Hongling glanced at her. Shijin suddenly said, Li Yundong, since you're not going to participate in the Taoist assembly, let's just leave, shall we? Li Yundong gently put his arm around Su Chan's slender waist. He smiled slightly and said, I came to participate in the Taoist assembly not only to compete for powerful magical weapons, but more importantly, to let the disciples of the Fox Zen School see this kind of high-level battle, especially for my disciple Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin sighed softly and said in a low voice, Master, without you on the field, there's nothing to see in a battle of this level. Li Yundong shook his head and said, No, each sect has its own magic and way of fighting, especially in the battle. They may show their own powerful magical weapons. For every cultivator, powerful magical weapons are equivalent to secret weapons. It's very good for you to see more of them. If one day you meet them, maybe these experiences can help you win. Moreover, the Taoist assembly has gathered almost all the masters of the Taoist cultivation world in the world. It's not easy to see such a large-scale battle. You can't leave in a fit of pique just because of a little setback. Hearing this, Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan secretly admired him in their hearts. This young man was only 20 years old, but he was thoughtful and magnanimous, as if he had lived several lifetimes. After hearing Li Yundong's words, Zhou Qin didn't say anything about leaving. Su Chan, Ruan Hongling, and the little foxes also temporarily put aside their own prejudices and focused on the field. Beside them, Xinyan and the others, who had been silent the whole time, looked at Li Yundong and the others while drinking tea. Xinyan sneered and said in a low voice, Humph, Tachibana Wakako, the person you want to see the most has already left the arena and will never be able to play again. Do you still want to continue watching? Although Tachibana Wakako could understand Chinese, she was still young and not very proficient in it. In particular, during the previous quarrel, everyone had spoken hurriedly and quickly. Although Tachibana Wakako had vaguely guessed some clues from the situation on the field, she still had a lot of doubts. She asked, Master Xinyan, why are these people treating Li Yundong like this? Ximian snorted. This is a characteristic of the Chinese, infighting. This country was always in a state of internal strife, always scheming against each other and fighting for power. Tachibana Wakako, I don't think there's anything to see in the fight between these cultivators. Do you want to leave? Tachibana Wakako looked at Li Yunyang with some disappointment and said, Master Ximian, I don't know either. However, I still want to watch for a while more. If I don't like it, we'll leave, okay? Ximian smiled and said, well, let's do as you say. At this time, Li Yundong noticed that the people sitting at the table next to him were the Japanese people he had met in Shiyuan Temple. He was shocked, frowned, and subconsciously wanted to find trouble with them. But as soon as this thought came to his mind, he remembered that he was now at the Taoist assembly and had lost the right to go on stage again. If he went to find trouble with them, he might cause something else. Moreover, these Japanese people were very quiet now. Even if they wanted to be arrogant, there were so many cultivators from cultivation sects here. Wouldn't they be able to deal with them? Thinking of this, Li Yundong suppressed this idea. At this time, Wang Jinyuan glanced at Li Yundong and shook his head secretly. He was a little worried and anxious, but he didn't show it on his face. He said to the crowd, everyone, Jinrenli has withdrawn from the Taoist assembly. Who's going to appear next? Although the cultivators on the field had gotten rid of Li Yundong, the strongest person, they were not ready to go on stage themselves. They looked at each other and hesitated. At this time, Zhang Cuni said loudly, since no one is going on stage, let me do it. After that, he walked into the field himself, cupped his hands, and said to the crowd, which cultivator would like to give me some advice? As soon as Zhang Cuni finished speaking, a young man jumped out and said loudly, I'm Zhao He of the Donghua sect. Jinren Zhang, please. When the little foxes saw Zhang Cuni go on stage, they all gritted their teeth and cursed in low voices, lose, you shameless bastard. Yes, it's best if you get beaten to death. Li Yundong glared at them and scolded in a low voice, what are you talking about? Don't you think you've caused enough trouble? The little foxes were shocked and sat up straight, looking as obedient as a little wife who had been bullied. Zhou Qin looked at the field and asked Li Yundong in a low voice, Master, who do you think will win, Zhang Cuni or Zhao He? Li Yundong glanced at the two of them and said in a low voice, Zhang Cuni. Zhou Qin asked curiously, how do you know before they fight? How do you know? Li Yundong said, putting aside prejudices and grudges, Zhang Cuni is a very strong cultivator. I once fought with him on Mount Tianlong. At that time, he wanted to sneak attack me in private, but I was on guard against it. Later, I fought with him a few times and could feel that his jinqi was strong and thick. He was indeed from a famous sect and was not easy to deal with. Moreover, look at the Sanhuang sword on his back. It's a very powerful magical weapon. While he was talking, he saw Zhao He cupping his hands to Zhang Cuni and saying with a smile, Jinren Zhang, it said that the Sanhuang sword of your Qingyang palace is powerful. Today, I want to see it for myself. What do you think? Hearing this, everyone was stunned and thought to themselves, the Sanhuang sword is one of the 5 great swords of the Taoist cultivation sects in the world. Isn't this person courting death by fighting with Zhang Cuni with powerful magical weapons? Zhang Cuni was also stunned for a moment. After thinking for a moment, he simply said, okay, as you wish. After that, he patted the black cloth bag behind him, and with a swish, a 3-foot-long sword jumped out of it. Most of the people had heard of the Sanhuang sword, but very few of them had seen the real thing. At this time, when they saw the Sanhuang sword, one of the 5 great swords of the Taoist cultivation world, appear in front of them, they all widened their eyes and looked at it. The sword was completely white and looked very ordinary. There was a red tassel on the hilt, and the sword stood steadily in the air. There was no sound of the sword, nor was there any provocative battle intent. It was so ordinary that everyone almost thought it was not the 3 sovereign swords, but just another ordinary sword. Zhao He took a closer look at the Sanhuang sword. He quickly showed his powerful magical weapon, which was 2 double hooks. Zhou Qin saw that the double hooks were similar to long swords, but there was an extra hook at the tip of the sword. She couldn't help asking curiously, what kind of powerful magical weapon is this? Zi Yuan, who was standing to one side, suddenly smiled and said, I was wondering why Zhao He dared to fight with Zhang Cuni with powerful magical weapons. It turns out that he is relying on the mutual restraint of weapons. Li Yunyang nodded and said, yes, the double hooks in weapons can restrain long swords. This kind of double hooks can hook and lock the long sword, making it impossible for the opponent to fight back. But while they were talking, they saw the two of them salute each other. Suddenly, there was a flash of white light on the field, and there was a clanging sound on the ground. Zhao He's magical weapon had been defeated. His double-hook magical weapon had just locked the Sanhuang sword, but it was twisted by the Sanhuang sword and instantly cut into 2 pieces, falling to the ground. The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar, and there was a cry of surprise on the field. Zhao He stood there dumbfounded, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. Li Yunyang was shocked. Is the Sanhuang sword so sharp? I thought it should be able to win, but I didn't expect it to be so fast. Zhou Qin stared at the Sanhuang sword with her eyes wide open. At this time, the Sanhuang sword was blooming with 3 colors, green, yellow, and black. She couldn't help asking in surprise, has the sword changed color? Li Yunyang explained in a low voice, this is the true color of the Sanhuang sword. These 3 colors represent 3 kinds of power. You should know that the Sanhuang sword is the powerful magical weapon of the Qingyang Palace in Sichuan. It is usually worshipped in the Jade Emperor Hall of the Qingyang Palace. Downstairs in the hall are the 3 main gods of the Sanhuang sword, the 3 great emperors. The 3 great emperors? Zhou Qin asked curiously. What are they? Li Yunyang said, the 3 great emperors are the heavenly officials who are in charge of the sky, the earth officials who are in charge of the earth, and the water officials who are in charge of the water, so they are also called the 3 great emperors. Heaven, earth, and water are the main components of this world, so the power of the Sanhuang sword comes from these 3 gods. You see, the cyan refers to the heavenly officials, the yellow refers to the earth officials, and the black refers to the water officials. Zi Yuan also nodded and added, yes, it is said that the Sanhuang sword was refined by Yuanshi Tianzuan after taking the 9 qis of Shiyang from the Great Void, the 7 qis of Qingshu from the Jituyang Cave, and the 5 qis of Qinhao from the Dongyang Fengzi. The primeval Lord of Heaven once gave this divine sword, which contained the power of the 3 great emperors, to Yao Xuanyu. Therefore, these 3 human sovereigns have all used this divine sword, which is why we in the cultivation world also call this sword the Sanhuang sword. Only then did Zhou Qin understand. She looked at the sword surrounded by the 3-colored divine light with awe and thought to herself, if my powerful magical weapon were to fight, would it be a match for him? I'm afraid it would also be cut in an instant, wouldn't it? Li Yunyang seemed to know what Zhou Qin was thinking. He comforted her in a low voice, Zhou Qin, don't think too much. No matter how powerful the powerful magical weapon is, it's just a dead object that can communicate with spirit. The key is still to see who uses it. If the person using it is strong, the powerful magical weapon will be even more powerful. If the person using it is not strong enough, the power of the powerful magical weapon will be greatly reduced. Zhou Qin nodded secretly and kept these words in mind. Tachibana Wakako looked at the shining Sanhuang sword and opened her mouth wide. She couldn't help but ask curiously, hey, this sword looks very powerful? Xinyan glanced at the Sanhuang sword, chuckled, pointed at Shinsu, and said, Shinsu can take this sword with his bare hands. When Tachibana Wakako heard this, she was immediately disappointed. Ah. No way. Isn't it just good-looking? Shinsu, who had always been submissive like a servant, whispered at this time, Tachibana Wakako, no matter how powerful the powerful magical weapon is, it still depends on who uses it. The cultivation quotients of these Chinese cultivators are too low. No matter how powerful the magical weapon is, it's useless. The three Japanese people whispered to each other. Zi Yuan, who was beside them, heard their words and couldn't help but look at them again and frown. Li Yundong was keenly aware of her strangeness and asked, Zi Yuan, what's wrong? Zi Yuan thought for a moment and whispered to Li Yundong, it's nothing. These Japanese look down on us Chinese cultivators. Li Yundong snorted coldly. They once said that there were no masters in mainland China. I wanted to teach them a lesson, but it's a pity that I didn't have a good chance. Zi Yuan snorted and said with rare anger, these Japanese people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How dare they be so presumptuous here? Forget it, let's ignore them and continue watching the battle. At this time, Zhang Cuni shouted at Zhao He. He proudly cupped his hands to the crowd and said, everyone, who else wants to try the power of the Sanhuang sword? Everyone had been shocked by the sharpness and power of the Sanhuang sword for a while. They were all afraid that if they went up, their powerful magical weapons would be cut off like Zhao He. That would really be too painful to live. For a moment, everyone hesitated and didn't dare to step forward. Xinyan sneered from the side. Finally, he couldn't help but say to Shinsu, why don't you give it a try? Shinsu was overjoyed when he heard this. He straightened his back and suddenly changed from a humble and wretched servant to an imposing master with sharp eyes. Shinsu took a step forward and said loudly, I'll do it. Chapter 496. Go to watch net. Shinsu shouted, which immediately attracted everyone's attention. Go to watch net. When everyone saw this, they were stunned and burst into laughter. Where did this Japanese come from? Someone shouted at Wang Jinyuan, Master Wan, why did you let the Japanese in? Wang Jinyuan hadn't expected that these Japanese would be unwilling to be left out. He frowned, stepped forward, and said to Xinyan, Master Xinyan, didn't we agree? Why didn't you keep your promise? Xinyan smiled slightly and said, Master Wan, my disciple Shinsu is eager to fight and wants to go up to the stage to ask for advice. This should not be considered breaking his promise, right? What's more, I didn't agree to anything at the beginning. As he said this, he said loudly to Zhang Cuni, my friend, I have a new disciple who wants to ask you for advice on fighting methods. I wonder if you would like to teach him? Zhang Cuni saw that the Japanese had an extraordinary bearing. He stood there like a beast, and his whole body was full of cold killing intent. It was obvious that he was a master. However, Zhang Cuni had the Sanhuang sword in his hand, so he was not willing to take this Japanese seriously. He laughed and said, well, let him come. I'll let you broaden your horizons. Wang Jinyuan was angry in his heart, but since Zhang Cuni had agreed, he had no reason to stop him. He could only put on a fake smile and said, in that case, I have nothing to say. Shinsu was wearing a well-ironed suit with a tie on his chest. His leather shoes were polished and bright. He didn't look like a cultivator at all. Instead, he looked like a handsome white-collar worker that could often be seen in Japanese TV series. Shinsu walked into the field. He bowed to Zhang Cuni and said, Zhenren Zhang, what are we going to compete in? Zhang Cuni chuckled and said proudly, you can choose whatever you want. Whether it's a battle of magical instruments, magic, close combat, or a battle of writing, I'm good at everything. Anything is fine. Shinsu smiled slightly, and there was a trace of cunning and contempt in his eyes. However, he said humbly, Zhenren Zhang, if we fight, I'm afraid this building won't be able to bear it. I think we should just compare our martial arts. What do you think? With a wave of his hand, Zhang Cuni called the Sanhuang sword back to his body and hung it behind him again. He stood proudly with his hands behind his back and said, well, let's fight. Shinsu smiled again and said, then Zhenren Zhang, please show mercy. Zhang Cuni laughed and said, don't worry, I won't hit you hard. Everyone also laughed. Zhenren Zhang, don't beat him until he cries. Li Yundong, who was on the sidelines, saw that everyone was underestimating the enemy, and he felt that something was wrong. He whispered, oh no, Zhang Cuni underestimated the enemy too much. I've met this Japanese before. His aura is vigorous and chilling. He's a very difficult opponent to deal with. Even if Zhang Cuni didn't underestimate him, he might not be his match, let alone underestimate him so much at this time. Zhou Qin sneered and said, then let's watch him make a fool of himself later. Who told him to be so arrogant? Li Yundong immediately glared at Zhou Qin and shouted in a low voice, be ****. Zhang Cuni and I have a personal grudge. His fight with the Japanese is against the national system. If he loses, he will not only lose his face, but also the face of the entire Chinese cultivation world. How can you not distinguish between public and private affairs and gloat? Zhou Qin was stunned for a moment. She had never been scolded like this by Li Yundong. Her face immediately turned red and she whispered, I'm sorry, master. I was wrong. Li Yundong didn't look at her. He stood up and said loudly, Zhenren Zhang, be careful. This guy is very difficult to deal with. Zhang Cuni glanced at Li Yundong and felt very disapproving in his heart. He sneered and said, Zhenren Li, why don't you come on stage? I just remembered that you can't go on stage anymore. Ha ha ha, so you, just watch quietly from the side. As soon as he said this, Zi Yuan, Wan Hongling, and all the people of the Fox Zen school were immediately furious. Su Chan pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and whispered, Leader, some people don't know what's good for them. You'd better not say anything. Wan Hongling was so angry that she shouted, Zhang Cuni, how can you treat my kindness as evil? Zhang Cuni glanced at her and sneered, Zhenren Li, I think you'd better take care of your men. Wan Hongling was so angry that she shouted. Subconsciously, she wanted to stand up and scold Zhang Cuni. Zi Yuan, who was beside her, immediately pulled her back and scolded her in a low voice. What are you doing? Do you want to lose face? Sit down. If Zhang Cuni doesn't appreciate it, then let him fend for himself. We don't have to make things difficult for ourselves. Wan Hongling snorted heavily. I've never seen such a narrow-minded man. Damn it. Li Yundong shook his head. He slowly sat down, sighed, and said, Alas. Zhang Cuni is so careless. I'm afraid he will be in trouble. Wan Hongling said angrily, then let him make a fool of himself. If we lose to him, will there be no one else in the Chinese cultivation world? Li Yundong sighed and said, These Japanese people have always looked down on our Chinese cultivation world. If they lose, they won't fight with you. Then they'll go back and publicize how they defeated the masters of our Chinese cultivation world. What will you do? Wan Hongling was stunned and stammered, They can't be so shameless, can they? Zi Yuan said, It's very possible. This kind of thing often happens in the martial arts world, and it's not like it hasn't happened before in the cultivation world. At this time, everyone put aside their prejudices and looked at the field worriedly. At this time, Zhang Cuni cupped his hands to Shinsu and said in a clear voice, May I know your name, my friend? Shinsu bowed and said, I'm Shinsu, a disciple of the 45th generation of Takano of Jinyin Tantrism. Please give me your advice. When everyone heard this, they all laughed and shouted, Shinsu. Hey, why did you take the name of Master Shinsu, the founder of our Chinese North Zen sect? Shinsu turned a deaf ear to them. He still had a slight smile on his face, and his eyes were fixed on his opponent. Zhang Cuni smiled and said, I'm Zhang Cuni, the 56th generation successor of the Qingyang Palace in Sichuan. Please give me your advice. After that, he took a step forward and bent his body. The tip of his foot gently touched the ground, and he put on the posture of the dragon 8 trigrams palm. Everyone pointed out that the foundation under Zhang Cuni's feet was solid, like the roots of an old tree. His clothes fluttered in the wind, like a cool breeze in a valley. It was obvious that he had obtained the essence of the 8 trigrams palm. Li Yundong saw this and nodded slightly. Fortunately, Zhang Cuni's foundation is good. He deserves to be the descendant of a famous family. Ziyuan also echoed, it's really good. I don't know what kind of kung fu this Shinsu is using. As the two of them were talking, they saw Shinsu take a big step. His right hand was in front of him, 4 fingers together, and his thumb was buckled inward, like a steel knife standing high. His right hand was bent in front of him, clenched into a fist, like a cannon that could be shot out at any time. Zhang Cuni saw that his posture was the Japanese karate swordsman stretching arms. He smiled slightly and said, it turns out to be karate. This kind of fist technique is more than fierce, but it's not soft enough. It's really a congenital defect. Today, I'll show you what the 8 trigrams palm is. After that, he waved to Shinsu and said with a smile, you're a guest from afar. Please go first. Shinsu didn't stand on ceremony. He suddenly shouted and stepped forward quickly. His right hand, which was stuck to his waist, suddenly punched Zhang Cuni. This punch was extremely powerful. It was as fast as lightning. Zhang Cuni only saw a blur in front of his eyes, and Shinsu's fist rushed in front of him. Zhang Cuni was slightly shocked and thought to himself, this guy is so powerful. Why is his fist so fast? Although he was surprised, he had been practicing martial arts since he was a child, and his foundation was solid. Subconsciously, his body seemed to fall off, and he turned behind Shinsu like a gust of smoke. With a flip of his hand, he thrust his palm towards Shinsu's abdomen. When everyone saw that Zhang Cuni's shifting shadows was really beautiful and elegant, they couldn't help cheering loudly. Li Yundong was also slightly relieved. He nodded and said, yes, as the saying goes, fierce 8 extremes, cunning 8 diagrams, Diao Taiji, poison Xingyi. Zhang Cuni's sliding step is really profound in the mystery of the 8 diagrams palm. The 8 trigrams palm was the most important, and more than half of its power was under one's feet. Zhang Cuni immediately circled around the enemy's back and he was in a favorable position. He was overjoyed and thought that he would win. Just as his hand was about to touch the opponent's body, he suddenly saw a vague face suddenly appear on the back of Shinsu's head. This face was ferocious like a ghost, and its eyes were scarlet red, revealing a terrible murderous aura. The face glared at Zhang Cuni, and in an instant, Zhang Cuni felt his whole body stiffen, as if there was an extremely cold and gloomy aura pressing into his bones, freezing his blood to the point that it almost solidified. The jinqi and strength of cultivators all came from their qi and blood. Zhang Cuni's qi and blood were suddenly blocked, and the strength and speed of his hands slowed down a lot. Then, a visible black aura quickly spread out behind Shinsu, wrapping around Zhang Cuni's hand like a crazily growing vine. Zhang Cuni was shocked and immediately tried to leave Shinsu's side. But at this time, Shinsu suddenly turned around. He turned around and slashed at Zhang Cuni's neck. Zhang Cuni's qi and blood were frozen, and his speed was greatly reduced. He wanted to escape, but his feet seemed to be filled with lead. He had no choice but to lower his head and avoid the palm. But as soon as he lowered his head, the Sanhuang sword behind him was exposed. When Shinsu's hand passed over his head, he flipped his wrist and immediately took away the Sanhuang sword. Zhang Cuni only felt a chill on the back of his head, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He was shocked, angry, anxious, and flustered. He immediately rushed forward desperately and shouted angrily, "Give me back my Sanhuang sword." But this rush was exactly what Shinsu wanted. Shinsu punched Zhang Cuni heavily. At this time, Zhang Cuni was in a mess, and the qi all over his body was stagnant. How could he escape this thunderous punch? With a loud cry, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body flew out horizontally. Before the cheers of the crowd had died down, the situation on the field suddenly settled. Everyone was stunned. Only Shinsu held the Sanhuang sword in his hand and laughed wildly. What kind of bullshit master is this? How dare you call yourself a master if you can't even take 3 moves? Master, you're right. There are no masters in the Chinese cultivation world. Ha ha ha. 8, let's go. Chapter 497. Go to watch net. No one had expected that Zhang Cuni would be defeated in 3 moves, and that he would be defeated so miserably. Even Li Jiandong hadn't expected that Zhang Cuni would be defeated so quickly. Even the powerful magical weapon of the Sanhuang sword had been taken away by the other party. Although there had always been old grudges between the cultivators of various sects, and no one looked up to each other, at this time, in the face of Xinxiu's arrogant words, they couldn't help but be angry. They stood up in unison and said angrily, B****, what did you say? If you have the guts, say it again. Japanese dog, come here. I'll let you know if there are any masters in the Chinese cultivation world. Xinxiu glanced at them disdainfully. He proudly said to Zhang Cuni, who was lying on the ground, clutching his chest and coughing up blood, I heard that there is a saying in the Chinese cultivation world, that is, those who are capable can have the magical weapons of the world. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Baidu search. I'm better than you now. If I defeat you, will this powerful magical weapon belong to me? Zhang Cuni hadn't expected that he would be seriously injured because of his carelessness. Moreover, the powerful magical weapon of the sect had been snatched away. At this time, he was ashamed and angry. For a moment, he was so angry that he spat out another mouthful of blood. Although the little foxes of the Fox Zen school didn't feel ashamed of him, they couldn't help but feel compassion for him at this time. They all turned their heads away and didn't dare to look at his miserable situation. Zhang Cuni's 2 shitty hurriedly rushed over and held Zhang Cuni. One mobilized his Jinqi to save him, and the other shouted angrily at Xinxiu, how dare you hurt our young leader? Give us back the Sanhuang sword, or our Qingyang palace will never let you go. Xinxiu laughed wildly and said, is that all the young leader has? If that's the case, what does it have to do with my vows? Hearing his words, Zhang Cuni was so ashamed and angry that his vision suddenly darkened and he fainted. The cultivators on the side suddenly exclaimed. Zhang Tianhe and Zi Yuan, regardless of the opinions of their sects, jumped to Zhang Cuni's side. Each of them grabbed a hand and went to check on Zhang Cuni's situation. As soon as they picked up a hand, they looked at each other. Zhang Tianhe looked at Zi Yuan with admiration and said in a low voice, Zhenren Zi Yuan, we meet again. Zi Yuan smiled faintly at him and nodded, then concentrated on checking Zhang Cuni's injuries. Zhang Tianhe saw that Zi Yuan had only greeted him politely and then ignored him. He felt lost and sighed dejectedly in his heart. After checking his injury, she said to Zhang Cuni's shitty next to her, it's okay. He was so angry that he fainted. However, Zhenren Zhang's injury is a little serious. I'm afraid he'll need to recuperate for a while. Only then did the anxious junior fellow apprentice feel slightly relieved. He glanced at the arrogant Xinxiu and wanted to take back the Sanhuang sword, but he was afraid that he was no match for him, so he said to Zi Yuan and Zhang Tianhe in a low voice, Zhenren Zi Yuan, Zhenren Zhang, this Xinxiu is so arrogant, and he has taken away the powerful magical weapon of our Qingyang palace. Zhenren, for the sake of the same Taoist origin, can you help us take back the Sanhuang sword? Zi Yuan said without hesitation, of course. How can our Taoist treasures fall into the hands of the Japanese? Zhang Tianhe also cupped his hands and said, don't worry, I'll get the Sanhuang sword in a while. After that, he stood up proudly and said loudly to Xinxiu, Xinxiu, if you know what's good for you, quickly return the Sanhuang sword. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude to you. Xinxiu glanced at him and sneered. Who are you? Zhang Tianhe said coldly, Zhang Tianhe of the Zhenyi school. The Zhenyi school had been the supreme Taoist sect in China since the Song dynasty. Although Xinxiu was a Japanese cultivator, he was also familiar with the name Zhenyi school. He suddenly felt a little awestruck, and the arrogance on his face dissipated a lot. He snorted and said, are you going to stand up for him? Zhang Tianhe raised his eyebrows and said, exactly. Xinxiu sneered and said, it's a fair competition between me and him. I admit defeat. What's more, his powerful magical weapon was taken by me, so it naturally belongs to me. Why are you standing up for him? After that, he raised the Sanhuang sword in his hand and said with a smile, I can't bear to return such a good powerful magical weapon. Zhang Tianhe was stunned when he heard this, but he quickly said, well, I'll fight with you. If you lose, you'll return the Sanhuang sword to its original owner. If you win, I'll give you my sword. Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Zhou Ping couldn't help but exclaim, Shitty, are you crazy? Zhang Ling, who was standing to one side, grabbed Zhou Ping's wrist and said in a deep voice, don't talk. Cultivators shouldn't be overcautious. Don't look back when you've decided. If Zhang Tianhe dares to do this, he must have the heart to win. Let's wait and see. When Xinxiu heard that Zhang Tianhe wanted the sword to make a bet with him, he was slightly surprised. He looked Zhang Tianhe up and down and thought, the sword in this person's hand is said to be one of the 5 divine swords of the Taoists in the Chinese cultivation world. I wonder how it compares to the Sanhuang sword. Hey, if I control the Sanhuang sword and fight with him, I think the expressions on the faces of these arrogant Chinese cultivators will be very interesting. Thinking of this, Xinxiu tried to transfer his Xinqi into the Sanhuang sword in an attempt to conquer this powerful magical weapon. However, as soon as he injected his Xinqi, he felt that the Sanhuang sword in his hand was struggling violently, and a fierce force came from it. This force was like the huge pressure of an ancient god, pouncing on Xinxiu with unstoppable momentum. Xinxiu was shocked. He knew that this was the counterattack of the Sanhuang sword's own power. He clearly felt that this force was like Mount Tai pressing down on him, and he couldn't stop it at all. He didn't dare to try again. His mind raced like lightning, and he quickly pointed the Sanhuang sword in his hand to the ground. With a thud, he stabbed the Sanhuang sword into the ground and said loudly, This Sanhuang magic sword is a great powerful magical weapon in your eyes, but in my eyes, it's just a piece of scrap metal. It's under my feet now. If you have the guts, come and take it. Hearing this, everyone was furious and roared, Zhenrenzhang, go up and teach this little Japanese a lesson. Zhenrenzhang, are you going up or not? If you don't, I'll do it. Zhang Tianhe also looked angry. He took a step forward and also stabbed his sword into the ground. He said loudly, If I win against you with a powerful magical weapon and a divine sword, I'm sure you won't be convinced. You just defeated Zhang Cuni with your fists and feet. I'll also fight you with my fists and feet and make you convinced. Hearing this, everyone cheered and said loudly, Zhenrenzhang, teach him a good lesson. Let them see the kung fu of our Chinese cultivation sects. Xinxiu glanced at the crowd, snorted, and said proudly, Okay. Zhang Tianhe stepped forward and stood 3 meters away from Xinxiu. He heard Li Yundong say loudly, Zhenrenzhang, be careful of his Xinqi. There's something strange about it. Zhang Tianhe turned his head and glanced at Li Yundong. Before, Li Yundong had warned Zhang Cuni. Everyone thought that he had other intentions, and Zhang Tianhe also had this kind of thought. But at this time, he knew that Li Yundong had good intentions. Zhang Tianhe nodded to Li Yundong. He stepped forward and put his hands in a Tai Chi position. Zhang Tianhe said in a deep voice, Xinxiu, please. Xinxiu smiled. He didn't stand on ceremony. With the power of the great victory just now, he stepped forward and punched. Zhang Tianhe snorted and put his right hand on Xinxiu's arm. With a move of grasping the bird's tail, he took Xinxiu's fierce punch aside. Zhang Tianhe came from a famous and orthodox family. Although he was young, his Tai Chi Kung Fu had already reached perfection. As soon as he put his hand on Xinxiu's arm, the strength of his whole body was like the Yangtze River, flowing out continuously. Everyone pointed to Zhang Tianhe waving his arms. His 2 arms were always on Xinxiu's arm, pulling him and turning him around, like 2 children pulling each other. Their postures were funny and strange. But no one in the field laughed. They all knew that Zhang Tianhe had already used the Tai Chi soft force to entangle Xinxiu, making him unable to use his fierce strength. It was like a sword that was sharp, but it couldn't cut off the flow of water. Although a rock was hard, it could be penetrated by dripping water. Zhang Tianhe was a cultivator, so he had great strength and thick shinqi. Once he used his soft force, not only was it powerful, but it was also like a spider's web. It coiled around Shinshouji until his arms felt heavier and heavier. His footsteps became more and more light and loose. His center of gravity began to loosen due to the other party's pull. It was as if he was in the middle of a turbulent sea. Shinsu was shocked. He thought to himself, is this Tai Chi? Didn't they say that Tai Chi has no actual combat ability? How can it be so powerful that I don't even have a chance to fight back? Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, also widened her eyes. She couldn't help asking Li Yundong, Master, is Tai Chi so powerful? I used to see old ladies doing Tai Chi in the park. I thought it was a fancy boxing skill. Li Yundong saw that Zhang Tianhe did not underestimate his opponent like Zhang Cuni. At this time, he had the upper hand. He was much relieved and said with a smile, are you kidding me? Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and Xingyi are the three supreme boxing skills of internal boxing. Moreover, there is a saying that if Tai Chi doesn't go out for 10 years, it will kill people when it succeeds. This boxing skill is extremely difficult to use, but it is extremely powerful and terrifying. Ziyuan also said with a smile, during the Qing dynasty, Tai Chi Grandmaster Yang Luchen created the capital alone. In the capital, where there were many masters, he defeated all the masters with soft force Tai Chi. Later, martial arts masters from all over the country came to challenge him. Yang Luchen never lost, so everyone gave him the title of Invincible Yang. Think about it, if Tai Chi was such a soft boxing skill, how did Invincible Yang get his name? Zhou Qin suddenly understood. She smiled, looked at the field, and said with a smile, it seems that Zhang Tianhe will win this round. Shinsu is now like a bug that has fallen into a spider web. No matter how hard he struggles, he can't get out. Li Yundong shook his head and said, you can't say that. In the end, it's still a matter of strength. Many people think that Tai Chi is soft and powerless and can't hit people at all, but in fact, they have completely misunderstood. Tai Chi also needs a lot of strength, but it is a boxing skill that can hit 100 kilograms of strength with 10 kilograms of strength. If you don't have 10 kilograms of strength, you definitely can't hit the opponent with 100 kilograms of strength. But if you have 10 kilograms of strength, but the opponent's strength is 200 kilograms, or even 500 kilograms, you will lose no matter how you fight. As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, he suddenly heard a loud shout in the field. Shinsu, who had been annoyed by Zhang Tianhe's strength, suddenly burst out with countless thick black auras, and strange black lines quickly spread all over his body. Not long after, his skin suddenly turned blue and black, and two black curved horns grew out of the top of his head. The bones all over his body crackled, and his body suddenly swelled up. The clothes on his body also tore apart, and he turned into a monster more than 2 meters tall with a green face and fangs. After the transformation, Shinsu let out a grim laugh. His 5 fingers suddenly grabbed Zhang Tianhe and exerted force. Like throwing a cloth bag, he lifted Zhang Tianhe high and then smashed him heavily to the ground. Zhang Tianhe suddenly saw that the other party had turned into such a monster. In his shock, he felt a shocking force coming towards him. This force was so strong that it exceeded the range of his control. His body was instantly grabbed by the other party, and then he fell heavily to the ground. Zhang Tianhe screamed. All the bones in his body were broken, and he fainted in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Shinsu reversed the situation. He stepped on Zhang Tianhe's body with one foot and laughed wildly. Can this kind of soft and slow boxing skill be used to hit people? What a joke! The cultivators present were in an uproar. Some of the seniors of the sects all stood up and said angrily, Yiksha? This person is Yiksha. Finally, I've made up for the missing chapter. Alas, it's not easy. I'm so tired. I'm going to sleep. 8. Go to sleep. Chapter 498. Go to the net. Yiksha. Su Chan stared at Shinsu with wide eyes and said in surprise, "This person is actually a Yiksha ghost?" Zi Yuan's face was full of seriousness. She said in a low voice, "I didn't expect that there would be a living Yiksha walking in the human world. How dare he appear in broad daylight?" When Zhou Ping of the Zhuni school saw Zhang Tianhe unconscious on the ground, she was anxious and angry. She shouted, "Let go of my shitty." Shinsu laughed and picked up Zhang Tianhe's body like a cloth bag. He laughed loudly and said, "Take it." His kick was so powerful that Zhang Tianhe's body was like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Zhou Ping. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Baidu search 8, go to the internet. Zhou Ping was shocked and subconsciously wanted to catch him with both hands. However, Zhang Ling suddenly stretched out her right hand, and Zhang Tianhe's body was abruptly lifted in the air, as if a pair of invisible hands had caught him. Zhang Ling's move showed her powerful zhenqi and exquisite control. Everyone couldn't help but cheer secretly. Zhang Ling turned to look at Zhou Ping and said in a low voice, "Take him away." Only then did Zhou Ping react and pick up Zhang Tianhe, who was suspended in the air. She glared at Shinsu hatefully, then turned around and checked Zhang Tianhe's injuries with concern. Zhang Ling glanced at Zhang Tianhe, then turned her head and said angrily to Shinsu, "How dare a little Yiksha ghost run amok in China? Are you tired of living?" Shinsu snorted and said, "What? Do you want to teach me too?" "Okay." Zhang Ling was furious. She raised her eyebrows, and the bright red cinnabar mole between her eyebrows suddenly seemed to turn into a small fireball. Blazing flames were ignited in her hands out of thin air. The temperature of the flames was so high that the surrounding air was distorted. Zhang Ling said that the Lady of the Earthly Fire was not only as fierce as fire, but her control of fire magic could also be said to be unparalleled in the world. At this time, she was furious and took out her trump card. Everyone watched as the flames in Zhang Ling's hand surged out of her palm in the blink of an eye. Then, the flames wrapped around her entire arm and enveloped her entire body in flames. Zhang Ling's eyebrows furrowed, and her entire body was burning with flames. She looked like an angry god of fire. She snapped, "You're courting death." After she finished speaking, she flipped her wrist and the fireball in her palm grew bigger and bigger. Everyone watched as the fireball in Zhang Ling's hand grew bigger and bigger, making a rumbling sound. It was like a bomb that was about to explode. The pressure was shocking. Even from afar, they were shocked by the blazing aura. Zhou Qin felt as if she was in a big oven, and the ends of her hair were curled up. She said in surprise, "What kind of magic is this?" Zi Yuan said with a pale face, "This is the Samadhi Thunder Divine Fire. Is Zhang Ling crazy? She will destroy this place." When everyone saw that Zhang Ling had suddenly flipped out and used such a destructive and lethal spell, they were all shocked and shouted, "Zhenren Zhang, what are you doing? You can't do that. You'll cause trouble." However, at this time, Zhang Ling's mind was filled with revenge for Zhang Tianhe. The most important thing was to regain the lost face of the Zhuni school. She turned a deaf ear to them, and the murderous intent in her eyes grew stronger and stronger. Even from a distance, Shinsu felt a terrible heat blowing in his face. In an instant, he smelled the smell of death. However, Shinsu became even more excited and fanatical. The black qi around his body became thicker and thicker, gradually condensing in front of him, as if forming a black mist. Everyone felt that this fog was like a black abyss. They could vaguely see countless black souls howling and hissing in it, making a sound that made people's hair stand on end. When Zhang Ling saw this, she became even angrier. "How dare you be so arrogant?" After that, she flipped her wrist and threw out the fireball in her hand. Shinsu roared, and the black mist in front of him suddenly turned into a ferocious ghost with a green face and fangs. It pounced on Zhang Ling's fireball. The malicious ghost opened its bloody mouth and swallowed the fireball. In an instant, the malicious ghost's body began to burn fiercely. Everyone immediately cheered loudly. Jinren Zhang, good job. Burn this Yiksha ghost to death. Zhou Qin and Su Chan were also enraptured. They gritted their teeth and said, burn him to death, burn this bastard. Li Yundong shook his head and said, Yiksha is known for being able to devour everything. Moreover, this Yiksha ghost is not a real human body. I'm afraid Zhang Ling's Samadhi Divine Thunder Fire won't be able to do anything to him. As he spoke, Shinsu suddenly laughed wildly. His body was much stronger than before, as if he had absorbed the power of the Samadhi Divine Fire. Everyone was shocked and said in shock, this is impossible. The Samadhi Divine Fire burns everything. Why can this Yiksha ghost swallow and absorb it? Zhang Ling's expression also changed greatly. She shouted sternly, what kind of monster are you? How can you swallow my Samadhi Divine Fire? As soon as she finished speaking, Xinyan, who was beside her, suddenly chanted the name of Buddha. Amitabha, please allow me to say something. Zhang Ling turned her head and sneered, what do you want to say? Xinyan smiled slightly and said, fellow Taoists of the Chinese cultivation world, my disciple Shinsu is neither a demon nor a ghost, nor is he a heretic. He is the guardian Vajra of Mount Koya, the successor of Yiksha of the demigods and semi-devils. He is a Buddhist guardian spirit. How can he be a demon? Then, Xinyan said loudly, Jinren Zhang, although your Samadhi true fire is powerful, it can't do anything to the guardian Buddha. Moreover, this is a fair cultivation fight. It's a matter between the younger generation. Jinren Zhang, as an elder, why are you interfering in it? Is it because you lost and became angry out of shame? I don't think the dignified Jingyi school is so narrow-minded, right? Zhang Ling glared at Xinyan. She thought to herself, this Japanese guy is right. If I also lose, then our Jingyi school will suffer a great loss this time. Thinking of this, the boiling flames on Zhang Ling's face slowly subsided. She turned her head and said coldly, which cultivator is willing to fight with this Shinsu? At this time, everyone saw that Shinsu, a ferocious-looking Yiksha, had even swallowed Zhang Ling's Samadhi Divine Fire. For a moment, they were all afraid and looked at each other in dismay. Seeing this, Shinsu sneered and said, Humph, you want to come up? Are you afraid? Everyone was provoked by him and was furious. Among them, Wang Ling stood up and shouted, I'll do it. The cultivators of the Jingyi school shouted, Shixiang Wang, teach this arrogant guy a good lesson. Zhang Ling glanced at him and nodded secretly. She whispered to him, Yiksha is very strong. Don't get close to him, and don't hit him with magic. This Yiksha is the guardian of the mountain. I suspect that he has a body immune to magic. I think only powerful magical weapons can kill him. Wang Lingfei nodded. Before he went on the stage, he turned his head and glanced at Li Yundong. He thought to himself, I didn't expect that the powerful magical weapon I refined to deal with Li Yundong would be used on the Japanese. What a pity. Wang Lingfei snorted. He walked to the field and took out a short sword that was only half a foot long from his back. Everyone saw that the short sword was red all over. It was shorter than a long sword but much longer than a dagger. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything special about it. When Shinsu saw this, he laughed and said, such a short sword? Your 3 sovereign swords and 7-star treasure swords are already mine, and now you want to give me another one? Wang Lingfei was not angry. He looked at Shinsu coldly and said, what powerful magical weapon do you have? Just take it out. Let's fight. Shinsu sneered and said, why would I use a powerful magical weapon to fight with you? Wang Lingfei laughed angrily and said, okay. Don't blame me for bullying you. After that, he suddenly turned into lightning and pounced on Shinsu. He held the short sword in his hand and stabbed it at Shinsu like lightning and thunder. Zhang Ling was shocked. She couldn't help stomping her feet and saying, damn it, didn't I tell him not to get close to me? As the saying goes, an inch longer, an inch stronger, and an inch shorter, an inch more dangerous. Wang Lingfei brandished his short sword, and like an all-pervasive mercury, he sprayed it toward Xinxiu. A mass of silver light danced among the crowd, almost covering Xinxiu's entire body. Even Wang Lingfei's own figure was covered by the silver light, faintly discernible. Some people recognized this move and nodded secretly, saying, "What a good move." However, this Yiksha's strength is great. Why do you want to fight with him in close combat? Isn't it better to compete with powerful magical weapons? Just as everyone was wondering, Xinxiu suddenly roared and clapped his hands. His two palms hit the dagger in Wang Lingfei's hand. He laughed wildly and said, "Let's see what else you can do." Wang Lingfei was not surprised, but happy. He sneered and shouted, "Sword Qi River." Wang Lingfei suddenly moved. He split into two, two into three, and three into countless. There seemed to be countless Wang Lingfei in the field. Each of them held a short sword in their hands. The short swords in their hands emitted a dazzling red light, like a torrential river. Sword Qi soared into the sky and madly pierced toward Xinxiu from all directions without stopping. In the blink of an eye, Xinxiu was penetrated by thousands of blades. Blood immediately gushed out of his body. With a roar, he unconsciously released his hands. Wang Lingfei, who was among them, immediately glared at him, stepped forward quickly, and shouted, "Got him." The short sword in his hand immediately pierced into Xinxiu's chest. Seeing this, everyone was overjoyed and immediately cheered. Xinxiu roared, and countless black qi suddenly appeared in front of his chest. It quickly spread toward Wang Lingfei along the short sword in his hand. Wang Lingfei was shocked. Just as he was about to let go, he saw Xinxiu, whose chest had been pierced, laugh ferociously. He quickly pinched his fingers with both hands and shouted the trump card of Zhenyan Tantrism like a thunderstorm, mantra of 9 words. Everyone saw that every time Yiksha shouted a word, he quickly made a handprint with his hands. These handprints were the Akalanatha print, the Great Golden Wool print, the Outer Lion print, the Inner Lion print, the Outer Bind print, the Inner Bind print, the Wisdom Fist print, the Sun Wool print, and the Aquarius print. Xinxiu quickly pinched the handprint, chanted the mantra, and shouted, "Lin. Bing. Do. Zhe. Jia. Zhen. Lai. In. Qian." Wang Lingfei saw that the black fog quickly appeared in the air, enveloping him from top to bottom. He thought to himself, "Oh no." Just as he was about to withdraw, the 9 words suddenly exploded with a bang. Everyone only heard a loud bang, as if a bomb had exploded in the field. In the blink of an eye, Wang Lingfei was blown to pieces and fell to the ground without a word. What? Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't help but widen their eyes. For the first time, they looked at Xinxiu with fear. They couldn't understand why this Xinxiu couldn't die even when the powerful magical weapon pierced through his body. Instead, he could recite the mantra and seriously injure Wang Lingfei. Xinxiu kicked Wang Lingfei away. He pulled out the short sword in his chest with a ferocious smile and stabbed it to the side. With a thud, the short sword was inserted next to the Sanhuang sword, showing off to the crowd as if it was his trophy. A black fog rolled around Xinxiu's pierced chest. Gradually, the black fog subsided, and his chest was as flat as before, with only a hole in his clothes. Xinxiu laughed wildly and said, "You can't even withstand a single blow." The cultivators of all sects gasped and thought to themselves, "What should we do?" Even Zhang Cuni, Zhang Tianhe, and Wang Lingfei lost. The 3 of them are the top masters of the younger generation in the cultivation world today. Even if there are powerful people in other sects, they won't be stronger than them. Even they were defeated in one move. Who else could beat this arrogant Japanese? For a moment, everyone was in a panic. Zhou Qin couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "Master, go ahead. You can't let this Japanese man continue to be arrogant." Li Yundong's face was as calm as water. He nodded and was about to go on the field when Ziyuan suddenly reached out and pressed her hand on his. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Let me go." Li Yundong was shocked. "Ziyuan, you're going?" Ziyuan asked, "Why? Don't you have confidence in me?" Hearing this, Li Yundong was stunned and said, "But..." Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. Since I dare to go on the field, I must have the confidence to win. You have to know that before you defeated me, I was the #1 master of the younger generation in the cultivation world." After that, Ziyuan slowly stepped down from the field. Her figure was as ethereal as an immortal's. She said in a cold voice, "I'm Ziyuan from the Linggong sect of the Zhini school. Please give me some advice." "Go on." Chapter 499. Go to Watch Network. She was wearing a long-sleeved white dress, and her hands were gently crossed in front of her. Her clothes were fluttering in the wind, and her beauty could topple a country. She was like an ethereal fairy from the clear shadow palace who had descended from heaven to the world. As soon as she appeared, everyone couldn't help holding their breath. Go to Kanban. 7 KOM 8. As soon as Shinsu saw Ziyuan, his eyes lit up. He couldn't help but be stunned and exclaim in his heart, "How could this woman be so beautiful?" Although Shinsu was arrogant, he was shocked by Ziyuan's amazing beauty and temperament. The arrogance on his face was obviously restrained. He sneered at the crowd and said, "Is there no one else in the Chinese cultivation world? Why did they send a woman up?" After that, he turned his head to Ziyuan and said, "I don't hit women. You can go down." Ziyuan smiled slightly and didn't say anything. She lowered her hands, and the sleeves of her hands hung down. Her sleeves were so long that they almost reached her knees, like the sleeves of an opera singer. In the middle of her sleeves, there was a 3-finger-wide purple gold-rimmed ribbon hanging down. Ziyuan didn't say anything, but some cultivators from other sects couldn't help but stand up for her. "Hey, you don't recognize Mount Tai? Do you know who this is? This is the great master of our Chinese cultivation world. She is known as the #1 master of the younger generation, Jinren Ziyuan." Shinsu glanced at Ziyuan and said with some emotion, "You're actually the #1 master?" Ziyuan lowered her eyes, like a jade goddess statue. Her face was calm as she said, "No." Shinsu was puzzled. "Then why do they say you're the #1 master?" Ziyuan said lightly, "There are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China. There are as many masters as there are hairs on an ox. How can I dare to be called #1? Shinsu quickly asked, "Then who is #1? Let the #1 fight me." As he said this, he pointed to Li Yundong, who was sitting to one side, and said, "Is it him?" Ziyuan glanced at Li Yundong and said, "It doesn't matter whether he's #1 or not. What's important is that you can't beat him, let alone me." Shinsu was furious. "Baka! How dare you look down on me? On the contrary, I know you are very powerful, but I have a way to beat you. As for Li Yundong, he has countless ways to beat you." Shinsu was so angry that she shouted, "Let Li Yundong fight with me. I want to see what countless ways he can defeat me." After that, Shinsu shouted angrily at Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, don't you dare to play? You coward, do you only dare to hide behind a woman?" Li Jiandong drank his tea slowly, as if he couldn't hear him. He turned his face and said to Zhou Qin in a low voice, "Ziyuan is good at playing mind games." She made Shinsu impatient. "Cooperate with me. Let's piss off this arrogant Japanese and help Ziyuan." Zhou Qin's expression didn't change, but she blinked at Li Yundong, indicating that she understood. Li Yundong took a sip of tea and deliberately said seriously, "Zhou Qin, why did I feel like someone was shouting at me just now?" Zhou Qin was also very cooperative and said with a look of surprise, "Really? Where is it? Why didn't I hear it?" Li Yundong said strangely, "No way. It was so loud just now. Didn't you hear it? Zhou Qin said blankly, I really didn't hear it, master. Li Yundong scolded, you're a cultivator. I clearly heard someone howling just now. How can you say that you didn't hear it? Zhou Qin was suddenly enlightened. She said with a smile, Master, you're wrong. That wasn't someone howling. Li Yundong asked curiously, what was that? Zhou Qin smiled and said, it was obviously a dog barking. How could it be a human howling? Li Yundong patted his forehead and suddenly said, so that's how it is. I heard it wrong. Your ears are so good. Everyone saw that the two of them were talking as if they were doing a crosstalk. There was no dirty word in their words, nor was there any name, but every word was scolding Shinsu. They immediately burst out laughing. Shinsu was not a fool. He was so angry that his face turned red. He said angrily to Li Yundong, Baka, I want to duel with you. If you have the guts, come up. I want to duel with you. Li Yundong still ignored him. He smiled and chatted with Zhou Qin while drinking tea. He said, oh, it's winter. Whose dog isn't tied up? Why is it barking everywhere? Zhou Qin also smiled and said, not only is it barking, but it's also biting people everywhere. Everyone laughed wildly. Shinsu was so angry that the veins on his forehead were bulging. He cursed at Li Yundong in Japanese. Xinyan couldn't help frowning. He shouted in a deep voice, Shinsu. You're here to fight, not to bicker. Xinyan's shout was like a blow to the head, shaking the teacups upstairs. Everyone suddenly felt a chill in their hearts. This old Japanese monk is so powerful. Xinyan's shout shook Shinsu's whole body. Soon, the anger on his face dissipated, and his impetuous aura slowly calmed down. He glanced at Li Yundong and said, Li Yundong, let me ask you again. Do you dare to fight with me? Li Yundong glanced at Xinyan and thought to himself, this old monk is a discerning person. He turned to Shinsu and said, if you win against Ziyuan, I'll fight with you. Shinsu took a deep breath and turned his gaze back to Ziyuan. It seems that I have to fight with you. Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, it seems so, unless you admit defeat and return the powerful magical weapons you stole. Shinsu laughed and said, how can I return what I stole? It's ridiculous. Come on, let me see what's so great about you, the number one in the world. Once I defeat you, I'll see what else you Chinese cultivators can do with your glib tongues. Ziyuan smiled, as if she disdained to say anything more to Shinsu. She put her hands in front of her and asked lightly, can we start? Shinsu snorted, and his whole body was surrounded by black qi. He said, come on. Ziyuan nodded and said, okay. As she spoke, she suddenly moved and rushed to Shinsu's side like a meteor. With a shake of her hands, the sleeves in her hands rushed toward Shinsu like a continuous river. Shinsu sneered in his heart. Without hesitation, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the sleeve. He exerted his strength and threw Ziyuan to the ground in the same way as he had done in the last game. He shouted, get up. The sleeve in Ziyuan's hand was grabbed. Not only did she not dodge, but the purple and gold-rimmed ribbon in her sleeve quickly wrapped around Shinsu's arm like a vine. As soon as Shinsu exerted his strength, she flew up with this force. Her body lightly swept over Shinsu's head, and the tip of her foot touched his head like a dragonfly skimming on the water. Everyone suddenly burst into laughter. Shinsu was so angry that he grabbed the top of his head with his other hand. However, Ziyuan's movements were extremely fast. Her body was like a swan flying across the ground, and she flew to the other side of him. At this time, a cultivator in the field asked in a low voice, why didn't Ziyuan step on the top of this Japanese dog's head just now? An experienced cultivator on the field shook his head and said, this Japanese man is very strange. Ziyuan might not be able to crush his opponent this time. Moreover, if she used too much force and lost her lightness, she would be caught by him. That would be troublesome. Look, don't ask. It's not without reason that Zi Yuan is known as the #1 master of the younger generation. Shinsu saw that Zi Yuan's movements were astonishingly fast, and when she moved, she seemed to leave an afterimage. He reached out to grab her, and it seemed that he could catch her, but when he did, it was an afterimage. Shinsu's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately pulled the purple ribbon wrapped around his hand with his other hand and released the black aura all over his body, which rushed toward Zi Yuan along the purple ribbon. However, Zi Yuan was not in a hurry. Her feet were either pointing or turning. Her body was either spinning lightly or bending her waist. Everyone could see that Zi Yuan was like a fairy dancing in the cold palace. She flicked her sleeves and walked like a cloud. For a moment, everyone was stunned. None of them had expected that this thrilling battle would be so elegant and ethereal, without a trace of murderous intent. Everyone felt that Zi Yuan did not seem to be fighting at this time. She was just dancing alone in the field, as if there was no one else around, cold and silent. Li Yundong was a little stunned. His eyes were fixed on Zi Yuan's pair of light and agile feet, and he sighed in his heart. They don't look like a pair of fairy feet that should step on the world of mortals, but a woman with such a pair of feet can only stagger through the thorns of the world of mortals. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but chant softly, her shape is like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Glorious autumn chrysanthemum, magnificent spring pine. It's like a light cloud covering the moon, drifting like the returning snow of the flowing wind. Everyone was stunned when they heard this. They all knew that Li Yundong's sentence was from Chao Zhi's Luo Shenfu, and he was praising Luo Shen. When they heard this, they couldn't help cheering in their hearts. They felt that these two sentences were simply describing Zi Yuan. Zhou Qin, who was next to him, immediately said, looking from afar, she is as bright as the sun rising in the morning clouds. Looking closely, she is as bright as a lotus. Seeing that Zi Yuan had the upper hand, Su Chan couldn't help but feel happy. She said with a smile, thick and slender, short and suitable. Her shoulders are as thin as a knife, and her waist is as thin as silk. Her neck is long and her skin is white. Her beauty is unmatched, and her lead is unbearable. Her hair is in a bun, and her eyebrows are slender. At this time, Wan Hongling and the little foxes also smiled and continued the following words one by one. After Lingyu finished chanting, Li Yundong continued with a smile, sigh at the unparalleled gourd, praise the solitude of Petunia. Raise your light gown, and stand still with your slender sleeves. Don't be as swift as a flying duck, float like a god, and take small steps like a mountain wave. Dust is born from your socks. After he finished chanting the last word, he saw Zi Yuan suddenly stop. She shook her hands, and the purple ribbon in her hands suddenly spread out like a waterfall. Her sleeves were still fluttering in the air, gently fluttering, like a wisp of quiet cloud floating and moving in the eyes of the people. At first, Shinsu tried his best to pull Zi Yuan's purple ribbon, but the purple ribbon in Zi Yuan's hand seemed to be endless. He pulled 1 meter, another meter, 2 meters, and then another 2 meters. But the more he pulled, the faster Zi Yuan twisted. Like a spider weaving a web, thin silk wrapped around Shinsu's body one by one, gradually making more and more ribbons on his body. When Zi Yuan completely stopped, he had already become a big dumpling. He had divine power and strange yin qi, but there was no place for him to use them. Shinsu struggled angrily, but no matter how strong a person was, how could he break free from such a restraint? Shinsu struggled a few times and found that the ribbon on his body didn't move at all. He said angrily, "You're cheating. I don't accept it." Zi Yuan smiled faintly. "You don't accept it?" Shinsu said angrily, "Let go of me. Let's fight again." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Okay." At this time, the cultivators of the Jingyi school and the Qinqing sect shouted in alarm, "Jinren Zi Yuan, don't let the tiger return to the mountain." But as soon as they finished speaking, Zi Yuan suddenly shook her arms, and the ribbons suddenly retracted. Shinsu felt as if he had been pinched in the palm of a giant, and then squeezed hard. He suddenly screamed, and all the bones in his body cracked. Ziyuan shook her wrist and threw Shinsu high into the air. In the blink of an eye, the purple ribbon in her hand was completely collected. Shinsu fell to the ground with a bang, bleeding from his 7 orifices and spitting blood foam from his mouth. Ziyuan looked at him faintly and said, "As I said, I have a way to defeat you. This way is to overcome strength with softness. If you're not convinced, you can recover from your injuries and then go to Li Yundong to see if he has the countless ways I said to defeat you." At this time, everyone seemed to have woken up from a dream and burst into thunderous cheers. Tachibana Wakako, who had come with Shinsu, cried out in alarm and rushed to Shinsu. She checked Shinsu's injuries and found that none of Shinsu's bones were intact. Moreover, his internal organs had all been severely injured by the fierce pressure just now. Even if he recovered from his injuries, there would still be extremely serious sequelae. Tachibana Wakako couldn't help but blush. She stood up and shouted angrily at Ziyuan, "How could you be so ruthless and beat Shinsu like this? Damn it. I want to challenge you." Yeah. Chapter 500. Go to Watch Network. Ziyuan had easily defeated Shinsu, which caused Tachibana Wakako to shout impulsively. Ziyuan looked at Tachibana Wakako in surprise and asked, "You want to challenge me? In what name?" Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Shinsu is the guardian of our Regoino. If you beat him like this, he will never recover his strength in the future. You are provoking and violating our Regoino." Although Tachibana Wakako was quite tall, she was only about 13 or 14 years old, and her thinking was extremely simple. Her words immediately caused the cultivators of various sects to laugh loudly. "You beat our people for nothing. We beat your people, but you are not happy. Is there such a robber logic in the world? That's right, little sister. Take this useless guy back quickly. Get out of here. Don't make a fool of yourself." Tachibana Wakako's face turned red when she was scolded by the crowd. Shinsu, who was seriously injured, struggled to whisper to Tachibana Wakako in Japanese, "Tachibana Wakako, forget it. These Chinese cultivators only know how to play some shameless tricks. You are the witch of Regoino, and you are also the most promising person to become the successor of the goddess in the future. Don't make any mistakes here like me. Go to Kanban 7 KOM. After hearing this, Tachibana Wakako not only did not give up, but also became more and more angry. She suddenly took out a gold and silver folding fan from the wide sleeve of her kimono. The bones of the fan were dark and full of exquisite carvings. Tachibana Wakako took out the folding fan and opened it with a snap. There were countless pictures of ghosts and gods painted on the fan. Then, Tachibana Wakako took out a 1-foot-long white flag from her sleeve. The flag was hung with dense white talismans, and each talisman was painted with strange patterns and runes. After Tachibana Wakako took out these two things, her whole figure and temperament changed. She seemed to have changed from an innocent girl to a fresh, dignified, sacred and noble holy virgin. She chanted a spell, waved the fan in one hand, and waved the flag in the other. At this time, a silver bell bracelet slipped out of her wrist, making a crisp sound as she danced. Everyone saw Tachibana Wakako singing and dancing. The ghosts and gods in the gold and silver fan in her hand seemed to come alive. They turned into shadows one after another and drilled into the white flag in her other hand. More and more spirit chi gathered in the white banner, and it gradually turned black from top to bottom. The runes on each piece of the talisman were emitting a strange red light. After dancing for a while, Tachibana Wakako suddenly waved the white flag at Shinsu. The red runes on the white flag suddenly emitted a dazzling light and gathered the black mist. In the blink of an eye, it entered Shinsu's body. Shinsu roared, and his body shook violently. After a while, he actually turned over and got up on his own. However, because his previous injuries were too serious, he staggered a little when he got up. Shinsu gave Zi Yuan a hateful look. He retreated to Xinyan's side and whispered in Japanese, "Master Xinyan, let's go." Zi Yuan's powerful magical weapon is very strange. She can't be hurt. She will only listen to you. Xinyan glanced at him, smiled slightly, and said, "Shinsu, you don't have to belittle yourself. Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon just happens to be able to restrain you. This is called one thing to conquer another. But no matter how powerful she is no match for Tachibana Wakako. You don't have to worry." Shinsu frowned and said, "But..." Xinyan glanced at Shinsu unhappily and said, "What, are you questioning my words?" Shinsu's body trembled and he lowered his head. "Hey! I got it." After that, he stood behind Xinyan obediently, and his body also changed back to its original appearance. Everyone saw that after Tachibana Wakako's dance, Shinsu miraculously stood up again. They were secretly amazed. Someone asked in a low voice, "What kind of magic is this? It's so strange. This Japanese dog is so badly injured, but he can still stand up." A knowledgeable cultivator whispered, "This is the goddess dance of Japanese witchcraft. This little girl should be a witch." Zi Yuan looked at Tachibana Wakako with a serious expression. She suddenly asked, "What's your name?" Ever since Tachibana Wakako had begun to dance, she had been like a witch. Her temperament and bearing seemed to have grown 10 years older. She said coldly, "I'm the witch of Rigoino, Tachibana Wakako." Zi Yuan was slightly surprised. "Are you a witch of the Tachibana family?" Tachibana Wakako looked at Zi Yuan in surprise. "You actually know our Tachibana family?" Zi Yuan frowned slightly, and her eyes were full of vigilance, as if there was a terrible enemy standing in front of her. She said, "What is the witch of your Tachibana family doing here?" When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "Master, is this Tachibana Wakako very powerful?" Li Yundong nodded and said with a serious expression, "Japan is a very special country. This country has a strict hierarchy, and there is a great class division in surnames. There are 4 noble surnames in Japan, namely the Minamoto clan, the Taira clan, the Tachibana clan, and the Fujiwara clan. These 4 noble surnames represent the 4 great families. The Fujiwara clan is the surname of a minister in Japan, and it is the most traditional noble family. The Minamoto clan and the Taira clan respectively represent the 2 most powerful families in Japan. Among them, the founder of the Minamoto clan was Minamoto no Raichou, who was the first shogunate general in Japan. The founder of the Taira clan was Taira Qinsheng, who created the era when the samurai class ruled Japan. At the end of the Warring States period in Japan, almost all the big shots in Japan were from the Minamoto clan and the Taira clan. For example, Oda Nobunaga was from the Taira clan, while Tokugawa Ieyasu was from the Minamoto clan. The entire history of the Warring States period in Japan was almost the history of the struggle between the 2 families. As for the Tachibana clan, it represents the gods and witches of the Japanese religion. Since the rise of witches, whether it is the Minamoto clan or the Taira clan, they have been running through the history of Japan from beginning to end. Among them, the Tachibana Remoto of the Tachibana clan is a famous witch deity. This Tachibana Wakako should be the direct descendant of the Tachibana clan. This kind of person is born with the power of psychic communication and can summon gods to possess her. Zhou Qin asked curiously, "But are there no ordinary people with the surname Tachibana who can be a witch?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No. In Japan, there is a special rule, especially for the nobles in Japan. They can't name people randomly. Moreover, during the shogunate period in Japan, there was an unwritten rule that only the members of the Taira clan and the Minamoto clan could be generals. Other surnames were absolutely not allowed. This is why Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who later unified Japan and ended the Warring States period, could not get the title of general until his death. he was only called Sekabai. Su Chan, who was listening attentively, couldn't help but ask, "What is Sekabai?" Li Yundong smiled and touched her hair, saying, "Sekabai is equivalent to the Prime Minister of China." At that time, Toyotomi Hideyoshi defeated all the vassals and unified Japan. In fact, he was equivalent to their emperor at that time, but even a person like him can't be a general. You can imagine how strict the aristocratic surnames in Japan are. Only then did Zhou Qin understand. She looked at Zi Yuan worriedly and said, "This Tachibana Wakako has such a powerful background. Will Zi Yuan be in danger?" Li Yundong's expression became serious. He said, "I don't know, but even if Zi Yuan is no match for her, she must have a way to protect herself." Zhou Qin knew that Li Yundong had been cultivating for a long time, and his character had become more and more stable. Even he was not optimistic about Zi Yuan, so she was afraid that this battle would be a disaster. In the field, Tachibana Wakako stood like a peony and walked like a peony. She looked at Zi Yuan and said in a clear voice, "Do you dare to duel with me?" Zi Yuan knew that at the moment, even if she lost, she wouldn't lose. She smiled faintly and said, "Since you are a descendant of the Tachibana family and the successor of Mount Koya, I will naturally accompany you. Let's see whether your Rigoino or our Lingong sect is stronger." Tachibana Wakako snorted coldly and said, "It's Rigoino, not Mount Koya." Her words confused many people. Zhou Qin asked Li Yundong in a low voice, "Master, is there a difference between Rigoino and Mount Koya?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "There are two religious mountains in Japan. One is Mount Hai, and the other is Mount Koya. In terms of religious power, Mount Hai is the largest and strongest. Almost all the famous monks in Japan come from Mount Hai. But in terms of fighting strength, Mount Koya is the strongest. Although all the monks in Japan come from Mount Hai, they are all buried in Mount Koya without exception, and they are all buried in the innermost part of Mount Koya's Okanoin. Rigoino is a place full of towering trees. Even in broad daylight, there is not a trace of light that can penetrate it. It is dark all day and gloomy. In the forest of these century-old ancient trees, there are tombstones everywhere. Each ancient tower tomb represents almost the most famous celebrities in Japan, such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Usuji Kenshin, Takeda Shingen, Akechi Mitsuhide, and almost all the eminent monks in Japan. Zhou Qin was stunned. That means... Li Yundong said, "This means that those who can enter Mount Koya's Rigoino are all the top masters in the Japanese cultivation world. Therefore, all the cultivators of Mount Koya feel honored to be able to enter the Okanoin of Rigoino." Su Chan, who was standing to one side, said in surprise, "Then isn't Tachibana Wakako also very powerful?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Of course. The magic power of the witch of the Tachibana family comes from the gods and vengeful spirits, and Rigoino has been gathering yin qi for thousands of years. There are divine monks' tablets and the tombs of generals everywhere. The murderous aura and spiritual qi in it must be extremely terrifying." Seeing that Li Yundong was talking with confidence and was very familiar with the history of the Japanese cultivation world, she couldn't help but sigh and say, "Master, how do you know so much?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "If you were locked up in the spirit space for tens of thousands of years, I'm afraid you would know a lot." While they were talking, they saw Tachibana Wakako reciting an incantation. She gently waved the flag, and the silver bell on her wrist rang. Soon, the runes on the flag slowly lit up again. A thick black chi came out of it and gradually formed a human statue in front of Tachibana Wakako. Everyone saw that the statue was wearing the armor of a Japanese samurai. The armor was crimson, as if it was covered with a thick layer of blood. There were all kinds of strange talismans on the blood, and a strong smell of blood could be felt from afar. The statue held a katana in his hand, and his face was hidden in the armor, revealing only a pair of scarlet, ferocious eyes. His gaze was cold and terrifying, as if he was a demon king from hell, sending chills down one's spine. Zhou Qin was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "What kind of monster is this?" Li Yunyang took a closer look and saw that the various talismans hanging on the warrior's body were all Buddhist demon-subduing talismans. He was immediately moved and said, "This person has such a strong smell of blood and so many Buddhist talismans on his body. Could he be Oda Nobunaga, the devil king of the sixth heaven, who once massacred Mount High?" As soon as he finished speaking, Tachibana Wakako said coldly to Ziyuan, "Jinren Ziyuan, please." After that, she waved the flag in her hand. The terrifying and ferocious demon king roared at Ziyuan. 8. Yeah. Chapter 501. Go to Watch Network. Seeing the terrifying devil king roaring and rushing toward her, Ziyuan did not panic. With a light tap of her feet, her figure was as light as a swan. She circled around the Ean's soul of the devil king of the sixth heaven and quickly wandered around. The purple ribbon in her hand was like silk, penetrating into the gap of the devil king's armor. As soon as Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon ribbon drilled into the devil king's armor, countless Ean Qi immediately rushed toward Ziyuan along the ribbon. It was like a black poisonous snake crawling along a vine, which made people's hair stand on end at first glance. Ziyuan saw that the speed at which the black qi was spreading was extremely fast, almost twice as fast as that of Shinsu. She was secretly shocked and immediately shouted loudly. Jinqi surged all over her body, and the purple ribbon in her hand was like a torrent of a raging river in an instant, fiercely surging toward the other party. In the blink of an eye, the devil king was firmly tied up. Ziyuan then shook her wrist and shouted, "Break!" With a bang, the devil king's armor was immediately torn apart by Ziyuan's purple ribbon. After the armor was dismantled, everyone saw that there was no one inside, only a mass of black mist that kept surging. In this mass of black mist, there were countless ferocious ghosts howling and hissing. The black mist kept twisting and howling, as if it was angrily reciting the incantation of hell at Ziyuan. Although Zhou Qin was not afraid of anything, she felt cold all over and her hair stood on end when she saw the scene in front of her. She even felt that if she were on the field, she would tremble all over and not be able to use half of her strength, let alone make a move. Zhou Qin couldn't help but whisper, "Why is this Oda Nobunaga so terrifying?" Oda Nobunaga is a famous daimyo in Japan. He has been fighting all his life. He once led troops to besiege Mount High, a sacred mountain in Japan, so his notoriety shook the entire Japanese cultivation world. Later, after his death, his tombstone was erected in Ragoino. The cultivators of Buddhism thought that his soul was too evil, so they added countless sealing talismans to suppress and curse him. Therefore, over the past hundreds of years, Oda Nobunaga's soul has become like this, full of resentment and all kinds of vicious curses. Anyone who fights with him will first be cursed by him, and their battle strength will be greatly reduced. Zhou Qin's face was full of fear. She said anxiously, "Fortunately, Ziyuan has already dealt with him." Li Yunyang frowned slightly and shook his head. "No, these evil spirits have gathered their power in Ragoino for hundreds of years. They can't be destroyed by powerful magical weapons and magic. It can even be said that they are immortal." While he was talking, he saw Tachibana Wakako wave the flag in her hand. The armor on the ground that had been torn apart by Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon actually closed up by itself and turned into a terrifying armored warrior again, staring at Ziyuan with ferocious eyes. Zhou Qin was shocked and couldn't help saying, "The devil has come back to life again. What should we do?" Ziyuan also frowned slightly, and the purple ribbon in her hand went back into her sleeve. She stared at Oda Nobunaga's soul and frowned, as if she was thinking of a way to deal with it. While she was thinking, she saw Tachibana Wakako waving the flag again and chanting a spell. Soon, the flag in her hand surged with black mist, and another black armored warrior appeared in front of her. This black armored warrior was wearing heavy armor and a sharp helmet. He was holding a Kiku character samurai sword in his hand, and there was a long military flag on his back. There were 4 majestic Chinese characters written on the military flag: Fenglin Fire Mountain. As soon as the black-armored warrior appeared, a terrible sense of oppression came over them, forming a sharp contrast with Oda Nobunaga, who had an extremely strong yin chi. There were two blazing fireballs jumping in the black armor of the black-armored warrior. He was like a war soul who had died with his eyes open, eager to return to the battlefield. As soon as he appeared, he let out a terrifying roar, and his boiling fighting spirit made the hair of every cultivator present stand on end. Although Zhou Qin didn't know much about the history of Japan, she was shocked when she saw the military flag behind the black-armored warrior. She whispered, "Is this Takeda Shingen?" Li Yunyang nodded and said, "Yes, it's Takeda Shingen, the tiger of Jiafei." Zhou Qin said worriedly, "One can't be solved, and now there are two more. What should we do?" Li Yunyang said in a deep voice, "If you want to fight head-on, there are two ways. One is to use the more powerful power of the gods to break the power of the other party's vengeful spirit, and the other is to use your own jinchi to exhaust the other party. The other party also needs to consume spiritual energy to summon the vengeful spirit. As long as we exhaust the other party's spiritual energy, we can win." The two of them whispered. On the field, Oda Nobunaga and Takeda Shingen, the two famous generals in the history of the Japanese Warring States period, roared at the same time and rushed toward Ziyuan. Oda Nobunaga rushed all the way. Wherever he passed, black fog would fill the air, seemingly devouring the space behind him. As long as someone got close to him or touched him, they would be dragged into the abyss of hell. As for Takeda Shingen, his entire body was surrounded by blazing flames. Although he was alone, everyone felt that when he charged, the military flag behind him was biting cold, and the words "Fulant wolf 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 Yuan was slightly startled. In the blink of an eye, the purple ribbon in her hand flew out and weaved a large purple net in front of her. The two vengeful spirits crashed into the net. She immediately flipped her wrist and controlled the magic weapon to quickly entangle the two vengeful spirits together. Oda Nobunaga and Takeda Shingen were tied together, struggling and roaring crazily. The silk magic weapon in Ziyuan's hand kept making hissing sounds, and the golden threads on it also bloomed with dazzling golden light. Ziyuan felt as if there were two wild beasts in her net, struggling with great strength. If she was not careful, the net would be broken and the fish would die. She didn't dare to keep the two vengeful spirits. With a rare shout, her hands shook, and the purple ribbon in her hand was like a sharp blade, instantly cutting the two vengeful spirits into countless pieces. When everyone saw that Ziyuan had repelled Tachibana Wakako's attacks twice in a row, they cheered loudly, especially the young male cultivators. They looked at Ziyuan with warm eyes full of admiration. Zhou Ping, who had always been at odds with Ziyuan, couldn't help frowning. She whispered, "Master, what kind of powerful magical weapon is in Ziyuan's hand? I've never seen her use it before. Why is it so powerful?" Zhang Ling smiled and said, "Wang Yuanshan once picked two pieces of ninth heaven immortal clouds from the heaven lake in Xinjiang. One was made into a smaller square handkerchief, which is the magical weapon used by Ruan Hongling. It's called the immortal red silk handkerchief, and the other is longer, which is what Ziyuan is using now. It's called the ninth heaven Ziyuan silk." These two magical weapons were originally immortal clouds, and clouds are things that have shape and trace but are invisible in the world. They can change into any shape according to the caster's will, just like the yang spirit. Therefore, this kind of magical weapon can be used for both offense and defense. When attacking, it's like raging waves, invincible. When defending, it's like an iron lock across the river, impregnable. Zhou Ping frowned and said, "But I've never seen Ziyuan use it before." Zhang Ling snorted and said, "Ziyuan has matured early since she was a child. She is talented, and is a rare all-rounder in cultivation. Wang Yuanshan himself is even more talented. He is a once-in-a-century genius. It's not without reason that he chose Ziyuan as the successor of the Linggong sect." The reason why she didn't use it was to guard against us, so that she could surprise us at the inauguration ceremony of the leader in the future. Hey, I didn't expect that the witch Tachibana Wakako would force her to use her unique skill. Zhou Ping said in a low voice, "It's best if Zi Yuan loses." Humph, let's see how arrogant this bitch can be. Hearing this, Zhang Ling was furious. She raised her eyebrows and scolded Zhou Ping in a low voice, B*****. Do you think this is a battle between the various sects in the cultivation world? Now this has evolved into a battle between the Chinese cultivation world and the Japanese cultivation world. This is a national war. It's a small matter if she loses, but she will lose the face of the entire Chinese cultivation world. Besides, Zi Yuan is theoretically still a member of our Zhengyi school. At this time, in the face of the national war, national affairs should be the most important. Under national affairs, the sect should be the most important, and personal grievances should be the most important. I didn't expect you to say such a thing. Have all the books you read gone into a dog's stomach? Zhou Ping's face immediately turned red from the scolding, but she didn't dare to refute. She looked at Zi Yuan with hatred, lowered her head, and stopped talking. At this time, everyone was looking at the field with concern. No one noticed the conversation between Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling. When Tachibana Wakako saw that Zi Yuan had broken the joint attack of her two undead fighting souls, a trace of surprise appeared on her face. She said, "Not bad, you deserve to be the number one person in the Chinese cultivation world. You have some skills." As she spoke, she recited a spell again. The two armored warriors, who had been crushed by Zi Yuan, gathered together again, and then another undead fighting soul appeared next to them. Everyone saw that this person was different from the previous two war souls. He was not wearing armor, but only a white Ronin's clothes. However, his clothes were torn and blood-stained. His body was full of spears and swords, making him look like a hedgehog. In front of him, there were 7 swords of different lengths. Each sword was chipped, as if it had gone through countless battles. It was as if it had gone through countless battles, exuding a fierce and heroic aura. As soon as Zhou Qin saw the undead appear, her heart suddenly seemed to be pinched by a pair of invisible hands, and it almost stopped beating. A sharp murderous aura, which was almost tangible, forced her to subconsciously want to escape. Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask in surprise, "What kind of monster is this?" Li Yunyang frowned and said, "This is General Ashikaga Yashiteru, who has the best swordsmanship among all the generals in the Japanese campaign. It is said that before he died, he fought against the rebel army alone. He resisted the rebel army's repeated attacks for 3 hours, and 7 swords were missing. In the end, he died of exhaustion." As he spoke, he saw the long sword in front of the undead buzzing. It jumped up by itself and floated in the air. The sharp blade pointed straight at Zi Yuan, ready to attack, and full of murderous intent. Zhou Qin couldn't help but take a deep breath. She said, "There's another one. What should we do? Can Zi Yuan defeat her opponent?" Li Yunyang's face was solemn. He shook his head slightly and said, "This Tachibana Wakako's spiritual energy comes from the power of the flag itself. As long as she has the blood of the Tachibana family, she can use it. The power of this magical item comes from the power of obsession formed by the generals and eminent monks buried here for hundreds of years in Mount Rigoya. This power is no small matter. It is as difficult as ascending to heaven to exhaust it." Zhou Qin asked worriedly, "Master, what if we can't beat it head-on?" Li Yunyang said without hesitation, "It's simple. Go straight ahead and capture the leader first. Even if he has thousands of war soul undead, I don't care. I just need to rush to the opponent and take the life of the caster." When Li Yunyang said this, Zi Yuan, who was in the field, seemed to have a tacit understanding. She suddenly moved and rushed toward Tachibana Wakako like lightning without waiting for her to take the initiative to attack. As soon as she moved, the 3 war soul undead roared and pounced on Zi Yuan. Everyone saw that Zi Yuan's figure was like a swimming dragon or a flying phoenix. Although the three souls of the dead were fierce and murderous, everywhere they passed was like a fierce hell, and the air was full of the pungent smell of blood. However, Ziyuan was like a fairy rushing into the battlefield of hell. Her feet were not stained with blood at all, and her clothes were fluttering without a trace of murderous intent. Under the joint attack of the three undead, Ziyuan's steps were ethereal, and her figure was like an afterimage. Everyone saw that every time the long saber of the undead was about to hit Ziyuan, she could always turn around and bend her waist in an incredible way. It was thrilling and wonderful to dodge. Everyone's heart was beating wildly and their blood was boiling. Ziyuan's figure was entangled with the three undead for a while. The ninth heaven Ziyuan's silk in her hand had unknowingly completed the layout and tied the three undead together. Ziyuan shouted, "Break again." With a few clangs, the sound of sharp blades cutting steel rang out, and the three undead were instantly cut into pieces by Ziyuan. But at this time, Ziyuan's figure did not stop. Her feet flew, and her figure was like an arrow, rushing straight toward Tachibana Wakako. She turned her hand and grabbed at Tachibana Wakako's face. When everyone saw that Ziyuan's move was about to succeed, they couldn't help cheering excitedly. But when their voices reached their throats, they suddenly saw Ziyuan's hand suddenly stop 2 inches in front of Tachibana Wakako. The soft black hair behind Tachibana Wakako suddenly rushed up like an upside-down waterfall. A witch in a white dress and a red dress appeared out of thin air in front of her. This witch was about 2 meters tall and extremely beautiful. There was a white light condensed like a knife in her eyes. Her face was cold, and her whole body exuded an awe-inspiring and inviolable pressure. The witch looked down at Ziyuan condescendingly and shouted in a voice that shook the surroundings, "How dare a little mortal offend the gods of my Tachibana family? You're courting death." After that, she turned her wrist and patted the top of Ziyuan's head. At this time, Ziyuan's whole body was enveloped by the power emitted by the powerful witch goddess. She only felt that her opponent's power was like a majestic monstrous wave, crashing down on her head and face, and with an unstoppable might, the black mass pounced on her. Vote recommendation previous page next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 502. Go to watch net. Ziyuan saw that this force was so strong that she could hardly move, especially behind her. The 3 war soul undead had sealed off all her retreat routes. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Everyone saw that all directions around Ziyuan had been blocked by the other party, and she was almost in a dead end. They all cried out in horror and stood up at once. Li Jiandong's eyes also suddenly burst into a bright light. He stood up with a rub, and the Jinshi in his body was about to burst out at any time. Just as Ziyuan was in a desperate situation, unable to advance or retreat, the 9th heaven Ziyuan's silk in her hands suddenly spun under her feet like a sharp sword, cutting a hole in the floor. In the blink of an eye, she fell from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor, narrowly avoiding this move. No one had expected that Ziyuan would be able to think of such a way to escape. They immediately burst into thunderous cheers. At this moment, everyone was impressed by Ziyuan's wit and calmness. Even Xinyan nodded slightly and said to Shinsu, "Ziyuan is a little clever." When Tachibana Wakako saw that Ziyuan could come up with such a way to escape, she was stunned and hesitated for a moment whether she should chase after her. But at this time, she suddenly felt a sudden movement under her feet, and then there was a sound of the floor being cut. Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon sprayed out from under Tachibana Wakako's feet like a fountain, rushing toward her like countless sharp arrows. Tachibana Wakako was furious. Her body suddenly floated into the air and she waved the flag in her hand down. In an instant, the tip of the purple silk was as sharp as a drill, and it stopped in front of her. It kept trembling and struggling, but it could no longer move an inch forward. Tachibana Wakako raised her eyebrows, and her whole body was full of inviolable pressure. She said sternly, "You're courting death." She waved the flag in her hand toward the round hole that had been drilled under her feet, and countless ghosts emerged from the flag and rushed toward Zi Yuan downstairs. But just as Tachibana Wakako waved the flag, Zi Yuan suddenly came out of the hole where she had fallen. Her eyes widened and she shouted. The purple ribbon in her hand instantly condensed into a ball, and then quickly stretched out, as if it had turned into a sharp spear. At this time, Zi Yuan seemed to have transformed into a warrior charging on the battlefield with a sharp spear in her hand. She spun her feet and twisted her body. Holding the purple spear in both hands, she suddenly stabbed it in front of Tachibana Wakako. Everyone who saw this move could not help but slap the table and praise it. From Zi Yuan's sudden inspiration to coming back to life in an impossible and desperate situation, to pretending to attack Tachibana Wakako's feet, and then suddenly appearing in front of her, this move was really beautiful. Moreover, even if the cultivators on the scene were blind, they could still see that Tachibana Wakako was being possessed by a god at this time. Zi Yuan was fighting with a god who had descended to the world with her own cultivation power. If it had been anyone else, they would have been defeated at this time, and they would not even be able to move in front of the pressure of this god. However, not only was Zi Yuan able to overcome this kind of powerful pressure, but she was also able to fight back so calmly and wittily. Her strength was inferior to others, but on the battlefield, she was not at a disadvantage at all. What kind of outstanding talent was this in fights of magical powers? Everyone cheered loudly, and Zhang Ling's eyes lit up. She shook her head repeatedly and sighed, "Wang Yuanshan has really accepted a good disciple. What a pity, what a pity." Zhou Ping knew that her master, Zhang Ling, had the heart to cherish talent. She felt it was a pity that she didn't have such a good disciple. She felt more and more upset in her heart, and when she looked at Zi Yuan, the hatred in her eyes became stronger and stronger. Xinyan also widened his eyes and looked at Zi Yuan. He couldn't help but exclaim, "What a genius attack! Wonderful, it's really wonderful. Among the Chinese cultivators I met today, Zi Yuan is the strongest. She is indeed the #1 person in the Chinese cultivation world. What a pity, what a pity." Xinyan sighed. He was sighing that such a strong opponent was still going to be defeated in front of his eyes. This kind of sigh was full of the victor's condescending disdain and sympathy, as if Tachibana Wakako had already won the final victory. Shinsu also looked at the field in surprise. He was not surprised by Zi Yuan's performance in fighting, but by the power displayed by Tachibana Wakako. Shinsu whispered in surprise, "Master Xinyan, when did Tachibana Wakako summon the goddess to possess her?" Xinyan smiled proudly. Among the witches of the Tachibana family, Tachibana Wakako is the most talented. I have always been optimistic about her inheriting the position of the goddess in the future. She has always had this potential, but she is very playful and unwilling to work hard. She doesn't have this awareness. But this time, she wanted to come to the Taoist assembly, and I felt that it was a very good opportunity, so I brought her here. Especially when she was about to go on stage just now, I thought that maybe I could force out her potential and let the true god appear. Now it seems that my decision was right. Shinsu, it's all thanks to your injury that Tachibana Wakako's potential can be forced out. Shinsu looked at Xinyan with admiration. He bowed and said, "Master Xinyan is indeed the most resourceful monk in Regoino. It's my honor to be able to contribute a little to Miss Tachibana Wakako." At this time, the people outside the field were talking. On the field, Zi Yuan was launching a fierce attack on Tachibana Wakako like a tide. Everyone saw Zi Yuan stand up and stab with the purple spear in her hand, but the flag in Tachibana Wakako's hand blocked in front of her. It was as if an invisible wall had appeared in front of her. The long spear fiercely stabbed into the wall, and suddenly a wave of visible ripples spread in all directions. Zi Yuan's determined move failed, and the 3 undead behind her also rushed over like maggots attached to bones. Zi Yuan was not discouraged. The powerful magical weapon in her hand instantly moved with her mind, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a shield, blocking the attacks of the undead from 3 directions. At the moment of blocking, Zi Yuan controlled the powerful magical weapon in her hand and shook it fiercely. The ribbon was like a raging wave, and it pushed the 3 fighting souls away. As soon as Zi Yuan forced the 3 undead away, Tachibana Wakako slapped her palm toward Zi Yuan. Her momentum was aggressive, and the pressure was difficult to resist. The powerful magical weapon in Zi Yuan's hand turned into a purple sword in the blink of an eye, stabbing toward Tachibana Wakako's palm. Tachibana Wakako saw that although Zi Yuan's powerful magical weapon was made of silk, the sharp tip of the sword was full of murderous intent and went straight to the bone. Although she was possessed by a god, she did not dare to resist with her physical body. Tachibana Wakako had no choice but to withdraw her palm and wave the flag in her hand to block. As soon as she retreated, Zi Yuan immediately won some space for herself. She instantly turned into a flying dragon and attacked Tachibana Wakako from all directions. The powerful magical weapon in her hand was constantly changing. Everyone saw that the weapons in Zi Yuan's hands were constantly changing, from knives, spears, swords, halberds to axes, knives, and forks. Their eyes were dazzled. For a moment, the cultivators in the field cheered and applauded like thunder. Su Chan's eyes widened and she said in astonishment, "Sister Zi Yuan is so powerful. Is she so strong?" Zhou Qin was also so shocked that she couldn't speak. Ever since she had reached the Zhuji phase, she had developed an extremely conceited emotion. She firmly believed that she would definitely surpass Zi Yuan and become the #1 female cultivator in the world. Especially in the previous battle, although Zhou Qin had been seriously injured, she felt that it was a proud battle for her to defeat the strong with the weak. But at this time, Zhou Qin saw that Zi Yuan was fighting against Tachibana Wakako with the weak. Her calmness and wit, her strategy to adapt to changes, and her control of the powerful magical weapon, especially her use of the powerful magical weapon in close combat, were really wonderful, which was amazing. Genius. No matter how proud and conceited Zhou Qin was, in the face of such as Zi Yuan, she had to admit, she is really a genius. The little foxes also widened their eyes and looked at the field. Most of them had heard of Zi Yuan's name, but although she was usually a little cold, because of her relationship with Li Yundong, they felt that Zi Yuan was also very easy to get along with. She was an elegant and modest woman, not like a great cultivator at all, let alone a master who was proficient in fighting. But only now did they know that Zi Yuan was so strong. The little foxes couldn't help thinking, could it be that the last time Zi Yuan lost to leader, was it because she let him win? Otherwise, based on Zi Yuan's current performance, how could the leader have defeated her at that time? Su Chan was surprised and delighted to see that Zi Yuan had the upper hand against the strong. She pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said, "Yundong, is Sister Zi Yuan going to win?" But Li Yundong frowned and shook his head. On the contrary, Zi Yuan has lost. Hearing this, Su Chan and the others were shocked and quickly asked, "Why?" Zi Yuan has already beaten Tachibana Wakako so hard that she can't fight back. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "That's because Zi Yuan knows that she is in a weak position, so she has to take the initiative to attack. This is the last resort." Su Chan asked curiously, "Why? If you are weak, shouldn't you defend and fight back?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No. As the saying goes, fighting is like using a weapon, and the art of war is like flowing water, invisible and changing. Only by making it impossible for the opponent to find a trace of it is the best way to fight." During the Three Kingdoms period, Shu was the weakest, but Zhuge Liang's national policy for Shu was that the weaker they were, the more they had to take the initiative to attack. They had to ignite the flames of war in the territory of other countries, so that other countries would not have the energy to take the initiative to attack them. Because once these countries that were stronger than them recovered and took the initiative to attack them, it would be like the pressure of Mount Tai, and it would be difficult for them to resist. That's why Zhuge Liang left Qishan 6 times, and then Jiang Wei invaded the Central Plains 9 times. Zhou Qin listened carefully. She was like a beginner who had suddenly entered a strange world. She eagerly learned and absorbed all the knowledge related to fighting. She asked, "Is Zi Yuan attacking desperately at this time so that Tachibana Wakako won't be able to use her full strength?" Li Yindong nodded and said, "That's right." But after a long attack, Zi Yuan gradually lost her sharpness. Moreover, her attacks looked fierce, but she couldn't hit her opponent once, let alone hit her opponent's vital parts. And if Tachibana Wakako hits Zi Yuan, it will be over. Zhou Qin sighed and said, "In the end, it's still a matter of the gap in strength." Li Yundong's face was solemn. At this time, Tachibana Wakako is possessed by a god, and her strength is several times stronger than Zi Yuan's. If it were anyone else, I'm afraid that they would have surrendered long ago and lost without fighting. But Zi Yuan can fight like this with an absolute disadvantage. It's really amazing. While they were talking, the situation on the field had become more and more obvious. Zi Yuan's offensive had been greatly weakened, but the 3 war souls controlled by Tachibana Wakako were becoming more and more ferocious. Every time they were repelled by Zi Yuan, the speed of their counterattack was getting faster and faster. Zi Yuan was almost unable to attack Tachibana Wakako at all. At this time, even a blind man could see that Zi Yuan was bound to lose. All of their hearts were heavy. They looked at each other and thought to themselves, how can this Tachibana Wakako be so strong? Even someone as powerful as Zi Yuan is no match for her. Who here can defeat her? Is our Chinese cultivation world going to be humiliated like this? Tachibana Wakako, who had been suppressed by Zi Yuan before, saw that Zi Yuan's crazy attack had basically stopped. This fairy, who was as quiet and elegant as a fairy, was also a little out of breath at this time. Her hair was messy, and it was obvious that her Jinqi was running out. Tachibana Wakako smiled coldly and said, "It's time to end it." After that, she flipped her left hand and waved the flag in her hand. A thick black fog rushed out of the flag. One after another, ferocious undead appeared in the black fog. It was like a black undead chi wall, blocking all the ways in front of Zi Yuan and pushing it toward her. Behind Zi Yuan, the 3 undead fighting souls also pounced on her from behind. Another jumped high to prevent Zi Yuan from escaping from above. The other one was short and waved a long saber at Zi Yuan's legs to prevent her from escaping from the ground again. This time, Zi Yuan was really blocked from all directions. She couldn't call for help from the heavens, and neither could she call for help from the earth. Everyone exclaimed. Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and Wan Hongling also stood up abruptly and shouted, "Oh no!" There was also a trace of despair in Zi Yuan's eyes. She couldn't help thinking to herself, am I going to die in the hands of this Japanese? Zi Yuan gritted her teeth and was about to fight to the death, but suddenly, she saw a figure suddenly appear in front of her. The man held the Akalanatha Mudra with both hands and shouted a mantra, bang. With a push of his palm, his hands were like a shining golden Buddha wall, pushing toward the black undead wall. When the 2 walls collided, there was a loud bang. The black chi fled in all directions, leaving only the shining golden Buddha wall still standing. Before Zi Yuan could react, she heard everyone shouting, "Be careful." The man turned around, put his arm around her waist, and pulled her behind him. At this time, Zi Yuan turned around. Only then did she find that the long sabers in the hands of the 3 undead controlled by Tachibana Wakako had already reached the man's face, only an inch away from the tip of his nose. Zi Yuan was shocked. Just as she was about to help, she saw the man suddenly shout. This loud shout was like the roar of Vajra or the roar of Arhat. It shook the air as if it was about to shatter into countless pieces and fall to the ground. In an instant, the armor of the 3 undead was shattered by this loud shout. The black chi wailed and fled in all directions. Hearing this loud roar, everyone subconsciously covered their ears. When the undead fled in all directions, they came to their senses. They all stared blankly at the scene, secretly horrified. The three undead that Ziyuan couldn't do anything to before were shattered by this person's roar. What kind of terrifying cultivation was this? At this time, Ziyuan also stared blankly at the young man in front of her, who was gently holding her waist. She saw that the man was smiling at her slightly, and his eyebrows were full of concern. Who else could it be but Li Yundong? 8. Do. Chapter 503. Go to watch net. Ziyuan stared at Li Yundong in a daze. This boy was like a towering mountain standing in front of her, able to shelter her from the wind and rain, able to stand tall and support the sky. Once upon a time, he would ask all kinds of questions about cultivation, and once upon a time, he would scoff at his immaturity and childishness. Watch net. 7K0 dash. But now, he had grown into such a powerful cultivator. The vengeful spirits that he had been fighting for so long were scattered by his aura with a single roar. At this moment, Ziyuan thought of her master. Back then, her master had been so powerful and reliable. It was as if she could feel warmth and peace of mind just by looking at his back. With him around, the sky would not collapse. Li Yundong looked at Ziyuan with concern. He saw that the fairy-like woman was staring at him in a daze. He thought that Ziyuan had been injured somewhere, so he asked with concern, Ziyuan, are you okay? Where are you hurt? Only then did Ziyuan wake up as if she had just woken up from a dream. She quickly looked around and saw that everyone was staring at the two of them in a daze. Ziyuan blushed and said in a low voice, let go of me. Only then did Li Yundong realize that it was inappropriate for him to hold Ziyuan in front of everyone like this. He coughed dryly and immediately let go of her waist, his expression a little unnatural. But at this time, everyone only noticed that Li Jiandong had easily resolved Tachibana Wakako's fierce attack, but they didn't notice Ziyuan's expression. Tachibana Wakako looked at him in surprise and shouted, it's you? Haven't you already withdrawn from the Taoist assembly? How do you know the Mahamudra Kung Fu of Arjunyan Tantrism? Li Yundong glanced at her faintly and asked instead of answering, aren't you Japanese? It's already an exception for Master Wan to let you participate in the Taoist assembly. Why do you Japanese cultivators want to make trouble at the Taoist assembly of our Chinese cultivation world? At this time, Tachibana Wakako was already possessed by a god, and her personality had changed greatly. Her previous innocence had long disappeared, replaced by the arrogance and conceit of the witch goddess of the Tachibana family. She sneered and said, just now, these cultivators treated you like this, and now you actually stand up for them? Li Yundong glanced at the people present and saw that most of them looked ashamed. He smiled slightly and said, I'm not standing up for them. I'm just standing up for Ziyuan and the Chinese cultivation world. Moreover, I seem to have heard you once say that there are no masters in the Chinese cultivation world, right? There is such a saying, right? Tachibana Wakako laughed and said, isn't it? Even Ziyuan, who is known as the #1 cultivator in the cultivation world, is no match for me. Does anyone still dare to come up? As she spoke, she looked disdainfully at the crowd with a proud and arrogant expression. Although the cultivators of the various sects were angry, the power that Tachibana Wakako had shown just now was at the level of a great cultivator. It was not something they could deal with at all. Even Zhang Ling was worried and thought to herself, this Tachibana Wakako is young, but her fighting strength is so strong. If they really fight, it's hard to say who will win, and this place will definitely be razed to the ground. And if I lose, then the Zhengyi school will be utterly humiliated this time. Li Yundong seems to want to stand up, so let him do it. If he wins, he can show the power of the Chinese cultivation world. If he loses, it has nothing to do with our Zhengyi school. The cultivators of each sect had their own thoughts. Especially after Zhang Cuni, Zhang Tianhe, and the others had suffered a crushing defeat, no one accepted the challenge. Seeing this, Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said, "If no one wants to fight, then I'll do it. I want to show you whether there are any masters in our Chinese cultivation world." Tachibana Wakako sneered and said, "Do you have the right to participate? Haven't you been deprived of your qualification? Humph, you Chinese people only know how to fight among yourselves." Li Yundong snorted and didn't answer. He turned his head and nodded to Zi Yuan, indicating that he was going to go on stage and let Zi Yuan go down. Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. She also knew that this was not the time to be sentimental. She nodded and said with concern, "You have to be careful. She is really strong, and I don't think she used her full strength just now." Li Yundong nodded slightly and smiled at Zi Yuan, indicating that she could rest assured. After seeing Zi Yuan sit back down, he cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan and said, "Master Wan, according to the rules of the Taoist assembly, can I go on stage now?" Wang Jinyuan had been silently watching the situation. At this time, when he heard Li Yundong ask him, he coughed and said, "Since the Japanese don't abide by the rules, why should we abide by the rules?" When the crowd heard this, they immediately shouted, "That's right. It's fine that you Japanese came uninvited, but you even started a fight. Do you really think that there is no one in our cultivation world? Jinrenli, teach these Japanese a lesson. Jinrenli, it's up to you." Hearing this, Tachibana Wakako sneered. She glanced at the crowd coldly and said with a sneer, "You Chinese cultivators treated him like an enemy just now. Now, it's as if you've seen your savior. I'm ashamed for you." When the crowd heard this, they felt ashamed in their hearts. Those who had scolded Li Yundong before were even more ashamed. Seeing this, Li Yundong said in a clear voice, "How they treat me is our own business in the Chinese cultivation world. It's not your turn to point fingers at us, and it's not your turn to comment." Hearing this, Tachibana Wakako was stunned. She said angrily, "Then let me ask you, why do you know the Mahamudra Kung Fu of Arjunyan Tantrism? Did you learn it secretly?" When Li Yundong heard this, he burst out laughing, as if he had heard the most incredible joke in the world. Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "B****, what are you laughing at?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "The disciple said that the master's kung fu was secretly learned from the disciple. Isn't this joke ridiculous?" "What a joke!" Tachibana Wakako's face was as cold as frost, and her eyes were filled with murderous intent. Arjunyan Tantrism was founded by Master Hirofa in the 7th year of Hongren, that is, 816 AD. At that time, there was the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu. How dare you say that we secretly learned it from you? Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then do you know the origin of Master Hirofa, who his master is, and where he learned the mantra's secret method?" When Xinyan heard this, he thought to himself, "Oh no, Tachibana Wakako is now possessed by the spirit of the Tachibana witch and is not good at arguing. Why did she bring up this topic? Isn't this asking for trouble?" Just as Xinyan was about to change the topic, Li Yundong said in a clear voice, "As the successor of Jinyan Tantrism and the witch of Mount Koya, you don't know the origin of the ancestor, nor do you know the origin of your kung fu? This is ridiculous." Li Yundong said with confidence, "Let me tell you. The founder of Mount Koya's Jinyan Tantrism, Master Hirofa, was born in Pingfengpu, Hongtian Township, Tadu County, Japan, which is now Shantongji City, Kagawa Prefecture, Shikoku Island. His father is Duke Zabo, and his mother is Ah Dao. Am I right?" Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Don't I know? Do I need you to teach me?" Li Yundong glanced at her sideways, smiled slightly, and said, "Master Hirofa has been intelligent since he was a child. When he was 5 or 6 years old, he had a reputation as a child prodigy. At the age of 15, he entered the capital, Nagaoka, and followed his uncle, Ah Dao, to learn Chinese articles such as the Analects of Confucius, the Book of Filial Piety, and historical biography. At the age of 18, he entered the Ming Classics Department of Beijing University and studied Mao poetry and other classics and history. He also devoted himself to creating a book that explained the relationship between Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, that is, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. Tachibana Wakako was impatient. She shouted, "You're so long-winded. What do you want to say?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Don't worry, I haven't gotten to the point yet." When Master Hirofa was 20 years old, he shaved his head and became a monk at Mount Weishan Temple in Wakizumi. At that time, his Dharma name was teaching. 2 years later, he changed his Dharma name to Konghai. At the age of 30, Master Hirofa found the Mahavarokana Sutra under the east tower of Kumi Temple in Nara. He studied it hard, but he couldn't understand it. So he decided to go to the Tang dynasty to learn the true method. So, Master Hirofa came to China in the 23rd year of the Japanese calendar. In the first year of Yongjin of the Tang dynasty, he became the disciple of Huiguo Ali, the 7th patriarch of Tangmi at that time. In early June of that year, Master Hirofa was born in the Great Mandala of the Tibetan realm and received the enlightenment of the 5 tribes. In early July, Master Hirofa was born in the Great Mandala of the Vajra realm and received the enlightenment of the 5 tribes. In early August, he received the enlightenment of Dharma Ali. In the 3rd month of the 2nd year, Huiguo Dashi imparted the 2 secret manuals and the altar instrument seal to Hongfa Dashi, and then he imparted to Hongfa Dashi the 10 drawings of the womb realm, the Vajra realm and the other great mandala, the diamond crown scripture, and the other secret scriptures, and 15 newly created props to Hongfa Dashi. At this time, Master Hirofa had already received the true teachings of our Chinese Buddhism Tangmi, so he was also called the 8th generation patriarch of our Chinese Tangmi. Li Yunyang spoke with confidence and composure in the field, clearly describing the life of Master Hirofa. Although many cultivators of the Taoist sects were familiar with the history of the cultivation world, most of them were Taoists, especially the history of the cultivation world in Japan. Some of them didn't know much about it. At this time, they suddenly understood. Oh, it turns out that the ancestor of this group of Japanese was our primary school student. Some people laughed loudly and said, "Japanese, you learned your kung fu from us. What are you so proud of?" Tachibana Wakako was a little dazed when she heard this, and her face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Xinyan felt bad in his heart. He chanted the name of Buddha and said loudly, "Jinrenli, what you said before was right." But after Master Huiguo Ali passed on the true method to Master Hirofa, Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty began to promote Taoism and prohibit Buddhism. Taoism flourished, but Buddhism encountered a disaster. From then on, Jinyan Tantrism declined in the Tang dynasty and disappeared in China. Instead, it flourished in Mount Koya in Japan. Your Chinese cultivation world has always known internal strife, but you don't know how to cherish it. We have helped you preserve your inheritance to this day. Don't you know how to thank us? Li Yundong smiled coldly and said loudly, "Oda Nobunaga during the Warring States period of Japan once burned Mount High. He ordered his army to kill anyone they saw. Whether it was civil or military monks, women, children, or some heads could be reported to him. The slightly beautiful women and children were left to reward the army, and the rest were all killed. As many as 4,000 to 5,000 people died in this disaster, and the corpses were scattered all over the mountain. Oda Nobunaga also set fire to the central hall and the 21 societies of the Mountain King in Yanli Temple. The Buddha statues and scriptures that had been collected for more than 100 years were completely burned. Mount High, the holy land of Japanese Buddhism, was burned to ruins. Such a great disaster is unheard of in our Chinese cultivation world. Do you have the nerve to blame us? Xinyan was furious, but he knew that Li Yundong's words were exactly the same. He wanted to refute, but he couldn't. He could only say, the Buddhist incantation of 9 words is the original magic of our Jinyan Tantrism. Jinrenli, how do you explain it? Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you really sure that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words was created by you?" He turned around and said loudly to everyone present, I believe that everyone knows that Tang Mi is not the only one who has the mantra Mahamudra. Tsang Mi also has it. The Japanese Jinyin Tantrism, that is, Dongmi, also has it. The mantra Mahamudra is divided into the 6-word mantra and the 9-word mantra. The 6-word mantra is Da, Ma, Ni, Padmi, which is mostly used by Jinyin Tantrism and Tang Mi. The 9-word mantra is Lin Bing, Doja Jie Jinyin formation, which is mainly used by Dongmi. The 6-word mantra originated from the Bodhisattva mantra, so it is also known as the 6-word Great Bright Mantra. Do you know where the 9-word mantra originated from? Everyone saw that Li Yundong was quoting scriptures on the field. He was eloquent and eloquent. He was really in high spirits and full of energy. Although they had a lot of dirty things with Li Yundong before, at this time, in front of the enemy, everyone had a common enemy. They all responded, Jinrenli, tell us quickly. Don't keep us guessing. Li Yundong smiled slightly and said loudly to Xinyan, the 9-word mantra that your Jinyin Tantrism is most proud of originated from our Taoist school. This sentence caused an uproar among many cultivators. Some cultivators were stunned and said, no way, the 9-word mantra of Jinyin Tantrism originated from our Taoist school? Why didn't I know? Ha, this is funny. My son beat me. That's not the funniest thing. The funniest thing is that I was beaten by my son, but I didn't know that the kung fu that my son beat me was learned from me. Alas, I'm wronged. I'm really wronged. This beating is too unjust. Damn it, these little Japanese are really a group of sons of bitches. They even beat me. For a moment, everyone was talking about it and laughing. When Tachibana Wakako, Shinsu, and Xinyan heard Li Yundong's words, they were all furious. Li Yundong said that the trump card created by Master Hongfa of Jinyin Tantrism originated from their Taoist school. 8 degree. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.